Arya Stark remembered the day she set sail from Westeros as clearly as if it had been etched into her mind with Valyrian steel. The tide had rolled in and out, waves slapping at the dock of White Harbor, gulls crying overhead, and a brisk wind singing of distant lands. That moment had signaled the beginning of her life as a wanderer and adventurer, a nameless girl in search of something she could not quite define. Her youthful curiosity, sharpened by her experiences in the House of Black and White and her perilous journeys across continents, had brought her to the eastern edges of the known world. She had traveled with merchants and explorers, stowing away when necessary but usually trading her skills with the blade for safe passage. And she had come to one shocking, all-consuming conclusion: Old Valyria, the legendary land of dragon lords and doomed by cataclysm, was not as inaccessible as people claimed. Of course, every tavern across Essos buzzed with rumor and hearsay regarding Old Valyria. The smoking sea was cursed, they said, and only fools dared sail its perilous waters. Men returned from those waters half-mad with tales of half-glimpsed shadows and monstrous creatures, ghosts that walked on crumbled causeways, and screams that echoed across molten terrain. Yet something about those stories called to Arya. For she was no stranger to fear, nor to curses, nor to the dead and the undead. The more impossible a thing sounded, the more she felt compelled to discover it for herself. And so she set her sights on the ruined empire, the once glorious realm of the dragon lords, hoping to glean the truth buried within the rubble of that storied civilization. When she told others of her plan, they balked. It was not that they doubted her abilities, they had heard the rumors of her skill with the sword, the well-kept secret that had once been whispered in bravos about the girl who trained with the faceless men. But Old Valyria was something else. Friends she'd made in the distant free cities eyed her warily, tried to dissuade her, insisted she chase lesser legends or remain content with the wonders of Volantis or Karth or Astapor. But their warnings only fanned the flames of her curiosity. She could feel the tug of fate, the same intangible push she had once felt beckoning her to the sea. She had disembarked from Westeros on a whim to see what lay west of Westeros, but then life had changed direction as it often did. Now it pulled her eastward, deeper into lore and risk than she had ever wandered before. She found a captain in Volantis who was unhinged enough to ferry her into those treacherous waters. Or, more accurately, she found one who was desperate enough for gold and who had lost too much in life to care whether he survived the journey. Arya found him drunk in a dingy tavern near the Long Bridge. His name was Rasso, and he was a scarred old sailor who claimed to have glimpsed the silhouette of a living dragon while sailing close to Valyria's outskirts decades prior. He was haunted by that sighting, drawn and repulsed in equal measure by the notion of returning. But coin sealed his fate. He gathered a skeleton crew, and on a mist-laden morning, Arya boarded the battered caravel that would carry her into the unknown. The crossing was at first unremarkable except for the growing sense of foreboding. Heavy clouds hung low in the sky. On the horizon, swirling gray shapes teased the imagination. Arya felt the air change around her as they neared Valyria, turning thick with sulfur and tension. She found herself drawn to the bow, scanning for any sign of land or ruin. Yet what struck her most was the silence and eerie quiet, as if the sea itself held its breath. They sailed deeper, past jagged rocks that loomed like monstrous teeth, and the water took on an oily sheen. Now and again, Rasso would mutter something about the shadows beneath the sea or lash the wheel with a trembling hand when he thought the swirling gloom off the port side looked too much like a drifting ghost. The crew grew jumpy, prone to outbursts if surprised. Arya remained calm. She had survived the White Walkers, the war, the nightmares in the House of Black and White. This land was new, but fear was not. She stood watch in the prow, her hand on needle's hilt, scanning the shore for the remains of the empire that had once conquered half the known world. At last, they saw spires rising from the sea mist, black silhouettes that cut the sky. The closer they came, the more they could discern of those broken towers, collapsed arches, shattered walls, and the jagged husks of what had once been a city of wonders. The stench of sulfur grew stronger. Ash drifted in the air, and the sea boiled in places where subterranean fissures vented scorching steam. The boat maneuvered carefully past hidden reefs of razor-sharp stone that jutted out from beneath the surface. Rasso swore incessantly until his voice went hoarse. Eventually, they found a precarious inlet where the boat could anchor, though the crew begged her to disembark quickly. Arya gathered her pack, a few precious supplies, mostly food, water, and some references gleaned from old texts that hinted at safe passageways through the broken city. With a final glance back at the tense faces of the sailors, she stepped onto the cracked pier. The heat radiating from the black rock was intense, making her think of the warm bricks in Winterfell's crypts on a summer day. She felt the weight of 1,000 echoes pressing in around her. In that moment, she could almost hear the drumming of ancient Valyrian hearts, the clang of forging steel, and the roar of creatures that once ruled the skies. The city's remains beckoned, labyrinthine, and mysterious. She turned away from the boat, knowing full well that if she did not return within a few days, Rasso might leave without her. The thought did not scare her as much as it should have. Something stirred inside her, a relentless sense that she was walking toward her destiny. Her boots crunched over a layer of ash. Every step stirred up gray-white motes that danced in the oppressive light. In places, the ash was shallow. In others, it formed drifts that came up to her knees. Ruined columns lay half-buried, like bones poking through dried earth. Ornate carvings, once resplendent, now worn into eerie visages, stared mutely at her passing. She moved slowly, methodically, mindful of each shift in the terrain. A wrong footstep could send her plunging into a fissure. She recalled the stories of explorers who'd stumbled into hidden pits of lava or unleashed pockets of toxic gas. As evening approached, the sky turned crimson. She found a partially intact structure that might have been a temple or a forum in ages past. Gaping holes in the roof let in enough of the fading sunlight to reveal a relatively safe floor space. With caution, she set up a small camp. She gathered bits of ancient wood, scorched beams, and driftwood that had washed onto the craggy shore and built a small fire. She had food enough for a few days, but she could already sense that time behaved strangely in this place. The hush of the city, punctuated by the distant hiss of steam and the occasional rumble from the depths, weighed heavily on her. That night, she dreamed of dragons. They soared across a blood-red sky, each wing beat rattling the bones of the city below. She dreamed she was standing atop a black stone tower, reaching up toward the largest of them, a beast of shimmering obsidian scales shot through with threads of gold and silver. The dragon roared, unleashing a torrent of flame that never touched her, though it set the horizon ablaze. Its eyes were molten gold, and as it circled closer, she felt an affinity, a kinship she could not explain. She awoke, heart-pounding. The fire had dwindled to embers, and a faint light had begun to glow through the temple's broken roof. She rose quickly, restoking the fire only long enough to warm a bit of stale bread before setting off. She followed a path deeper into the city, weaving between collapsed arches and ancient dwellings. Occasionally, her keen eyes would catch sight of a long-dead figure, a skeleton half-hidden in the ash. Sometimes it wore the tattered remains of clothing, sometimes scraps of metal that might have once been armor. Arya gazed upon each with quiet respect. Whatever had happened here, the doom of Valyria had happened swiftly and savagely, leaving no survivors. The weight of that ancient tragedy pressed upon her with every footstep. Though no one lived there now, she sensed she was not alone. Something watched her, she could feel it. She heard movement just at the edge of her hearing, a scrape of claws against stone, the shuffle of something large along the ash-laden ground. She thought of wolves moving through the forests of the north, silent predators that circled an unwary traveler. But here, the predator would be different. And though she was prepared to defend herself, she could not deny the flicker of excitement coursing through her veins. She rounded a bend and found herself in what must once have been a grand courtyard, ringed by statues whose features had been melted or eroded beyond recognition. In the center stood the remains of a massive fountain, its base cracked, its water long gone. As she approached, she realized the cracks in the ground radiated outward from the fountain's center, forming a web of fractures in the stone. She heard a low rumble and froze. There, curled in the shadows behind the fountain's jagged rim, was a dragon. Its form seemed almost spectral in the half-light. The creature was smaller than she expected for a dragon, but large enough. Its scales were a dark charcoal, streaked with dull red. Its eyes glinted with an intelligent wariness. Arya's heart seized. She had heard stories that all dragons in Valyria had perished during the doom, yet there it lay, an impossible remnant of a bygone era. The dragon regarded her with an unwavering gaze. She did not move. Her mind whirled with the lessons she had gleaned from tales of Targaryens and their dragons, from rumors whispered about Daenerys Stormborn and her brood. Fear was there, yes, but also wonder and a strange sense of recognition akin to what she had felt in her dream. Seconds became minutes as they simply stared at each other. The dragon let out a soft growl, a rolling note of warning. Arya's pulse hammered in her ears. She tried to remember the old Valyrian words she'd learned in Bravos, but she doubted they would mean anything to a beast. Yet something in her insisted that the dragon was more than just a mindless creature. She crouched slowly, resting her hand lightly on the hilt of needle. She did not draw the blade, but she did not want to appear defenseless. The dragon sniffed the air, then exhaled a plume of heated breath that made the ash swirl. Arya remained motionless, letting it catch her scent, letting it weigh her presence. She did not know how long they remained locked in that mutual study, but eventually the dragon shifted. It unfurled its wings slightly, revealing the tattered membrane of one wing. It looked wounded, as if some old injury had never fully healed. Whether that was from the doom itself or some other mishap, she could not guess. The beast seemed wary, as if not quite able to launch into flight without some effort. Arya felt a pang of empathy. She knew all too well what it was to be wounded and alone. Carefully, she stood, and slowly, step by step, she moved to the edge of the fountain. The dragon hissed, flames licking at the edges of its jaws. She paused, heart-thudding. But she did not back away. She felt certain that if the dragon truly meant to kill her, it would have already. So she took another step. A dark hush enveloped the courtyard. Ash fell gently through the broken arches. The statues looked on with blind, melted faces, as if bearing witness to a miracle. Arya found herself standing just a few paces from the dragon. She could smell the brimstone on its breath, see the subtle quiver of its flanks as it breathed. Its eyes were pools of orange fire. She reached out slowly, gently, an open palm. The beast growled. She almost retreated, but something anchored her. The courage that had carried her through countless perils steadied her hand. And to her astonishment, the dragon stretched its neck forward, sniffed her fingers, and then let out a subdued chuff, almost a sigh, as if it had resigned itself to her presence. She knew it was madness, but she set down her pack and rummaged for food. All she had were bits of dried meat and some stale bread, but she held out a piece of the meat. The dragon eyed it skeptically. Then, with a swift motion of its head, it snatched the morsel from her hand. She felt the sharp scrape of scales against her fingertips. The creature swallowed, let out a snort of steam, and then blinked at her. Something indescribable passed between them, an understanding, perhaps. She felt an odd sense of peace, as if the restless part of her soul that had driven her across oceans and deserts finally found something it recognized. She stroked the dragon's neck, feeling the roughness of scales beneath her trembling hand. She heard a low rumble emanate from its throat, maybe the closest thing a dragon had to a purr. A spark of elation ignited in her chest. For days, she stayed in that courtyard. She ventured out only to scavenge anything that might serve as fuel for her small fire, or to explore the surrounding ruins in search of anything edible or valuable. She found no fresh water beyond what she carried, and so she rationed it carefully. The dragon followed her with its gaze. Sometimes it slumbered, seeming to drift into a twilight realm of its own making. Sometimes it watched her with piercing intensity, especially when she tried to find a vantage point to survey the city. At night, she would sleep beneath a crumbled archway, the dragon curled not far away, emanating a comforting warmth that kept the chill at bay. One evening, she found a deeper chamber beneath what appeared to have been a library or a place of arcane study. Dust-laden shelves lined the walls, though any books that remained had long since rotted. In the center of the chamber was a massive mosaic, cracked by centuries of neglect, depicting men and dragons in flight. She traced the outlines with her fingertips, marveling at the artistry. The mosaic seemed to celebrate the bond between dragon lords and their beasts, an image of perfect synergy. It struck her that in the world that once existed here, men and dragons had not merely coexisted but thrived in a complex, mystical relationship. In that quiet moment, she felt a stir of longing to understand what that bond might have felt like. She thought of the Targaryens, of Daenerys, and of the stories that had drifted to Westeros about her dragons. Now, impossibly, here was Arya, forging her own tenuous connection with a living relic of that bygone era. At first, she named it Shadow for the way it seemed to blend with the ashen gloom. Yet as she spent more time in its company, she realized the name did not quite fit. Though the dragon had a dark aspect, there was something bright and fierce in its eyes. One morning, she whispered, "You should have a name worthy of what you are." The dragon cocked its head as though listening, but made no other response. She tried out different Valyrian words, hazy recollections from her time in Bravos, though none felt right. At last, she simply smiled and said, "I'll know it when I know it." Whether the dragon understood or not, Arya could not say. Yet each day, it let her come closer, tend to the small tears in its wing, offer it scraps of food. She discovered that it could hunt on its own, vanishing into the ruined labyrinth at night and returning before dawn, a fresh kill of some unfortunate creature clamped in its jaws. And so she realized that her presence, her small offerings, were not strictly necessary. It chose to remain near her for some reason. Perhaps it sensed a kindred spirit in her, a being unmoored from its place in the world, searching for something intangible. She felt certain of that. She had once been no one, she had worn many faces. Now she found that this single identity, Arya Stark, was enough in the eyes of this dragon. The air continued to thicken with sulfuric fumes and the sky remained a haze of red and gray. She learned to cover her mouth with a scrap of cloth when she ventured too far from the courtyard, for the air would choke her otherwise. She found hidden alcoves and pockets of wealth, gold coins stamped with dragon sigils, locked chests she could not open. But she had no interest in treasure. She found old swords, rusted and brittle with time, that made her marvel at how ephemeral human achievements could be. She returned to the dragon day after day, telling it of her discoveries. Sometimes she swore she saw a spark of intelligence in its gaze, as if it followed her words or at least her tone. At length, her supplies of water ran dangerously low, and she knew she had to return to the boat or else perish. She felt a strange reluctance to leave the dragon behind. On the eve of her departure, she laid a hand on its snout. "I'll come back," she whispered. The dragon rumbled softly, as though in acknowledgement. She wasn't sure if it would still be here when she returned, nor if she would even survive the return journey. But she would try. Navigating back through the ash-laden streets, she reached the spot where Rasso's boat had anchored. To her relief, it remained tethered, though it looked as if the crew had half a mind to flee. Their nerves were shot, and the deck was strewn with empty bottles. Apparently, the men had tried to bury their fear in drink. Rasso's eyes bulged when he saw her emerge from the gloom, grimy but alive. "Seven hells," he exclaimed. "I thought we'd be going home with naught but a ghost story." Arya forced a tired smile. "I found a reason to stay," she said simply, and refused to elaborate further. She convinced them to remain another few days, bartering with what she had scavenged in the ruins, old gold trinkets and coins of ancient minting. Most of the crew did not want to linger, but greed overruled their caution. She shared just enough of her story to pique their interest, though she kept the dragon a secret, a precious mystery she was not ready to reveal. She stocked up on supplies, more water, salted meats, a fresh coil of rope. She studied the tide charts and gleaned what knowledge she could about the labyrinthine ways through the crumbling city. The men pressed her for details, hoping for something they could sell as a tall tale in distant taverns. She gave them only fragments of half-truths. On the third day, she made her return, this time better equipped to face the noxious fumes. Again, the city greeted her in grim silence, and she followed the path back to the courtyard, her heart in her throat. She found the dragon in the same place, as though it had not moved. But its eyes flared with recognition the moment it caught sight of her, and it let out a soft sound of greeting. Relief washed over her. She had not fully realized how afraid she'd been that it might have vanished, that she'd have discovered it was only a dream conjured by the madness of Valyria. Over the next few days, she built a routine. Each morning, she would explore further into the ruins, mapping them in her mind. She avoided pockets of molten lava and vents spewing toxic gas. She took note of grand structures whose collapsed domes and labyrinthine catacombs beckoned with secrets. At midday, she would return to the courtyard, where the dragon waited. They would share a quiet companionship. She would speak softly to it, and sometimes it would let her stroke its scaled flanks or run her hand gently along its injured wing. She found a salve among the supplies she had persuaded the sailors to give her. Though it was meant for human injuries, she carefully applied it to the torn membrane of the dragon's wing, hoping to aid its healing. One afternoon, she discovered a series of winding stairs leading down into a temple complex. She descended warily, a torch in one hand and needle in the other. The dark corridors were lined with faded murals depicting dragons of every color and size, their riders wearing elaborate crests. By torchlight, she could just discern words in High Valyrian scrawled along the base of the murals. She deciphered a portion. "Our blood is the flame. Our bond is the fire." She paused before another mural that showed a slender figure with short cropped hair, possibly a female Valyrian, reaching out to a newborn dragon. Something about the image struck her. It looked eerily similar to her own first encounter with the wounded dragon above. In her mind's eye, she saw again that moment of wonder, the hush of possibility when she reached out her hand. The echo of ancient magic lingered here, like an imprint on stone. Days became weeks. She discovered more and more about the city's layout, stumbling upon altars where the dragon lords had performed arcane rites, glimpsing half-collapsed forges where they had once crafted Valyrian steel. She found a handful of melted blades, fused together in a tangle of once great weapons, a testament to the fire that had consumed the city. Sometimes, she would sense the dragon behind her, stalking silently as she ventured through the ruins. She let it follow her, unafraid, feeling safer in its presence. She had no illusions that the creature was tame, but she trusted it not to harm her unless she gave it cause. She tried to puzzle out how a dragon could have survived the doom. Perhaps it was an egg that hatched long after the cataclysm, nurtured by the residual heat of lava flows. Perhaps it was part of a small clutch that had eked out an existence in hidden caverns for centuries. Whatever the truth, she felt privileged to witness it. And the bond between them seemed to deepen every time their gazes met. There was an unspoken language in the tilt of its horned head, the flick of its tail, the flicker in its molten eyes. One evening, she sat by her makeshift campfire in the courtyard, staring at the dying embers. The dragon curled nearby, half dozing. She felt a gentle stir of air as it shifted. Then, unbidden, it moved closer, until its snout was nearly resting at her side. She stiffened at first, then eased her posture. Slowly, she reached out and laid a hand on the dragon's snout, feeling the warmth of its breath, the softness of the underside of its jaw. It made a low rumbling sound. Tentatively, she turned so that they faced each other. Its pupils contracted and expanded, catching the glow of the firelight. She inhaled, her heart thudding in her chest. A sense of awe washed over her, mingled with a profound sense of gratitude. She remembered the mosaic in the library's hidden chamber, the images of riders and dragons united in purpose. She felt that elusive connection spark in her, as though some ancient magic was stirring once more. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the older words, the whisper of Dracarys and Valimorgulus. She recalled the Valyrian phrase for friend or ally, though it was less a single word and more a concept woven into the language. Softly, she tried to speak it, stumbling over the archaic syllables. The dragon's ears, such as they were, twitched. It tilted its head, exhaling a gentle puff of hot breath. She tried again, shaping the words with care. It rumbled in response, a note that reverberated in her bones. She realized tears were gathering at the corners of her eyes. This was not sorrow or joy alone, but something deeper, a sense of coming home to a destiny she had never known she possessed. From that night forward, she could feel the shift in their relationship. The dragon was no mere guardian of these ruins, nor was she merely an intruder. They walked side by side through the labyrinth of old Valyria, exploring silent halls and haunted crypts. Sometimes they would pause at a vantage point where the broken cityscape stretched in every direction, the horizon swallowed by red mist. The dragon would lift its head, tasting the air, and Arya would rest a hand on its flank, marveling that she could stand so close to such raw, unimaginable power. Other times they huddled together at night against the sharp chill that sometimes crept in after sundown, a faint echo of what the doom had wrought upon this land. Despite the injuries that marred its wing, the dragon began to test its flight capabilities. Once, as they stood atop a tall, broken tower, it spread its wings with a sudden snap that startled Arya. She scrambled back as it leapt into the sky, flapping mightily. The tattered wing membranes held, though not perfectly. It managed a short glide, circling once over the courtyard before landing heavily. She rushed to its side, anxious it might have aggravated its wounds. The dragon snarled in frustration but allowed her to inspect it. The tears had not reopened, but the beast was winded. She thought of the raw majesty of dragons in flight, how they could scorch armies from above. She recalled stories of Aegon's conquest and the unstoppable fear that living dragons had instilled in Westeros. And here was one, trying to remember how to be what it was meant to be. Sometimes, in her silent musings, she wondered if she was prepared to be part of such a monumental fate. She was Arya Stark, a girl shaped by war, by grief, by the assassins of Bravos, by countless challenges that had taught her to rely on herself alone. She had never considered dragon riding, never thought she might forge a bond with such a creature. Yet it seemed as though the gods, be they old or new, had other plans. The sense of belonging she felt with the dragon was unlike anything she had known since her direwolf Nymeria prowled the wilds of the Riverlands. This was not simply a sword in her hand or a name on her lips. This was a living bond, profound and elemental. When at last she felt the time was right, she tried to climb onto the dragon's back. At first, the beast resisted, snorting and snarling, its tail lashing. She backed off, murmuring soothing words. But the second time she attempted it, it seemed more accepting. She used a broken piece of masonry as a makeshift platform and hoisted herself carefully onto its shoulders, just behind the crest of its neck. The dragon let out a huff of impatience, shifting its weight. She clung tightly to a ridge of scales, feeling the power of its muscles rippling beneath her. She half expected it to take flight immediately, but it merely paced in a small circle, as if testing whether it could bear her weight. When it settled, she slid off, her legs shaking with adrenaline and wonder. It took another week before she felt truly secure astride the dragon. Each time, they inched closer to the moment of flight. Each time, the dragon flapped its wings experimentally, stirring clouds of ash. Arya could sense both its yearning to soar and its lingering apprehension, the memory of pain in its injured membranes. She whispered encouragement, ran her hands along its scales, felt the rumble of its breath beneath her fingertips. As she grew more familiar with the weight distribution and how to keep her balance, a new dimension of trust blossomed between them. At last, on a smoldering morning, the sky riven by streaks of red light, the dragon stretched its wings wide. Arya, perched carefully on its back, held her breath. She felt the coil of its hind legs tensing, the sudden surge of energy as it sprang into the air. For an instant, time seemed to stand still. Then gravity caught them both, threatening to pull them down. The dragon beat its wings with savage intensity, each stroke lifting them higher. Arya's heart hammered. She let out an involuntary cry, part fear, part exhilaration. They rose above the courtyard, above the crumbled towers, above the ash-choked streets. The city spread beneath them in all its wounded grandeur. The flight was brief and shaky. The dragon glided more than it flapped, nursing its half-healed wing. When it landed on a nearby terrace, Arya almost tumbled from its back, her hands shaking from the sheer magnitude of what had just happened. She slid off, breathless, tears in her eyes. The dragon turned to regard her with a keen, golden gaze. She let out a laugh that echoed through the empty halls, a sound of pure, unbridled triumph. For a brief moment, the spirit of old Valyria seemed to shimmer in the air, as if the city, long thought dead, was rejoicing in the revival of one of its children. From that day forward, they practiced more often. The flight durations grew longer. Arya came to understand how to shift her weight to minimize pain on the dragon's injured wing, and the creature, for its part, grew stronger, the sinews of its wings knitting under the combined effect of time, rest, and careful salves that Arya applied. Her mind raced with the implications. What would happen if she flew this dragon out of old Valyria's ruin, out over the smoking sea, back to Essos or even to Westeros? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Eventually, she returned to the boat to reassure Rasso and his men she was still alive. Their eyes widened when she mentioned glimpses of movement in the skies and how she believed something still lived amid the ruins. She did not tell them the full truth. Instead, she convinced them that she needed more time, more supplies, and offered further gold trinkets to ensure their cooperation. She suspected they thought her half-mad. None of them dared to follow her back into the city to verify her claims. She was grateful for that. The last thing she wanted was a horde of treasure-seekers or unscrupulous hunters disturbing the dragon. She spent another fortnight in Valyria, forging a bond that transcended words. She began to think of the dragon as a friend, or perhaps more than that. A piece of her soul that had been missing, an embodiment of her wild, unbridled spirit. She still had no name for it. Words in the common tongue felt inadequate, and the Valyrian phrases she knew didn't quite capture the creature's essence. She decided she would let the name reveal itself in due time, much like the blossoming of their trust. It happened on a day thick with sulfur, the air so hot that sweat beaded on her brow the moment she left the shade. She and the dragon soared over the city, climbing higher than ever before. Its wings, though still bearing scars, had regained much of their strength. The wind whipped at her face, and she squinted against the red-tinged sunlight. Far below, the jagged spires and broken domes resembled a sea of black teeth. The dragon let out a thunderous roar that resounded across the desolation. In that roar, Arya heard defiance, rebirth, and a claim that it still lived, that Valyria was not entirely dead. She clenched her fists around the ridge of its neck, a fierce grin on her lips. She felt unstoppable in that moment. When they landed in a wide plaza, scattering ash and dust with the downdraft of the dragon's wings, Arya slipped off and staggered a bit, her legs not yet accustomed to prolonged flight. She laughed breathlessly, patting the dragon's side. The beast folded its wings, smoke curling from its nostrils. She gazed at it with a kind of reverence. "You are fire and blood," she whispered. The phrase sent a chill through her. Those words once belonged to the Targaryens, but in this place, it felt as though the phrase belonged to the dragon itself, an embodiment of Valyria's lost glory. She placed a hand over her heart. "You've shown me something I never thought I'd feel again." That night, she dreamt of Winterfell. She dreamt of running through the snow-covered courtyards with her siblings, of needlework she loathed and training she adored. In her dream, she saw a mighty dragon perched on the battlements, wings outstretched against a sky lit by the northern lights. She stood in the courtyard, sword in hand, fearless. The dragon roared, and somewhere in the dream's depths, she heard Nymeria howling, as if wolf and dragon were calling to her from across the tapestry of her life. She woke with her skin tingling, an ache in her chest. She had left home to see what lay west of Westeros, but destiny had led her here, to the eastern edge of the known world, to this improbable union. Time stretched and she lost track of days. She practiced flight with the dragon, scoured more of the city's ruins, and lived in a state of awe that threatened to overwhelm her whenever she paused to reflect on it. The sparse supplies she had taken from Rasso's boat began to dwindle. She knew she would need to leave soon to find proper provisions. But the thought of parting from the dragon gnawed at her heart. She caught herself wondering if the dragon could fly across the sea with her, if it could withstand the journey to a place where she might secure better supplies. The boat was too small to accommodate the dragon, and the crew would likely be terrified. It was an impossible quandary. Yet she believed that, given time, the dragon would be strong enough to make the crossing alone. Then, on a sultry evening, a thunderous crack shook the ruins. Arya jolted awake from a light doze. The dragon sprang to attention, its eyes flaring with alarm. Another crack, like the splitting of stone, echoed through the labyrinth. She hurried out of the courtyard, weaving through pillars and fallen archways, drawn to the source of the commotion. The sky flickered with a strange crimson glow. She soon realized it was not just the sunset or the usual ashen light. Something else was happening. Far off, a fissure had opened, spewing molten rock and choking fumes. The ground trembled beneath her feet. She raced back to the courtyard, heart pounding. The dragon let out a low, anxious rumble, pacing in agitation. She understood immediately. Old Valyria was shifting again, as if the great subterranean forces that had doomed it centuries ago were still restless. If the fissure spread or the city sank further, they could be trapped or worse. She had a desperate sense that if she did not leave soon, she might never leave at all. And yet, the idea of abandoning the dragon was unthinkable. She locked eyes with it. "We have to go," she said, though she knew it could not grasp the full meaning of her words. Still, the dragon snorted, stomping its claws, seemingly mirroring her urgency. She ran through a mental list of possibilities. If she tried to take the dragon to the boat, the men would likely panic. If she tried to lead the dragon away by air, it might not have the endurance for a long flight across open water. But they had to do something. Another tremor rolled through the earth, sending a nearby column toppling. The crash reverberated through the courtyard, sending plumes of ash skyward. The dragon roared at the swirling debris, wings flaring reflexively. Arya took a step toward it, her pulse thrumming. This was the moment of truth. She climbed onto its back, feeling the dragon tense beneath her. She leaned forward, pressing her body close, gripping the ridge of its neck. "Fly," she whispered, nearly praying. "Fly us out of here." The dragon responded with a deafening roar, launching itself upward. The motion was sudden and violent, nearly dislodging her as it beat its wings against the swirling ash. But she held on with every ounce of strength, her eyes watering from the wind and grit. Up they rose, higher and higher, clearing the courtyard walls. Below, a cloud of ash and smoke billowed from the collapsing structures. Valyria seemed to groan beneath them, an old wound torn open once more. The dragon banked sharply, scanning for a safe passage. Arya felt the muscles under its scales bunch and release with each powerful stroke. Her stomach lurched as they dodged a rising plume of sulfuric steam. This was no leisurely training flight. This was survival. She caught a glimpse of the harbor in the distance, where Rasso's ship was anchored. It looked tiny, a speck on a dark sea. A wave of relief and trepidation washed over her. Could the dragon carry her that far? Could it land near the ship without inciting chaos? As if sensing her thoughts, the dragon angled its wings toward the open water. Arya clung tight, her heart hammering in her chest. Every breath burned with sulfur. The heat emanating from the fissures below rose in waves. She urged the dragon onward with soft words and a fierce will. She could feel its wings trembling with the effort of flight, the strain on its healing membranes. Just a bit farther, she found herself whispering over and over like a mantra. They soared over the outer edges of the ruined city, the broken towers giving way to jagged coastline. The open sea lay ahead, gray and forbidding. The salty air mingled with the acrid stench of Valyria, a discordant blend of life and death. She saw the boat's sails shifting as the crew realized something massive was approaching from above. A flurry of activity broke out on deck. She spotted Rasso yelling orders, men scrambling to arm themselves or hide. The dragon circled, letting out a challenging roar that caused the sailors to cower. Arya leaned low over its neck and whispered urgent words, trying to calm it. Slowly, carefully, the dragon descended, kicking up violent gusts that rocked the boat. Men shouted in terror. Some readied crossbows. Arya waved frantically, shouting for them to hold their fire. She could see the whites of their eyes, the raw panic on their faces. She had to get them to understand they were not under attack. But the dragon was no docile beast. It sensed their fear and bared its teeth, smoke seeping from its nostrils. Arya's heart pounded. If the men loosed those bolts, the dragon would retaliate with fire, and all would be lost. She slid off the dragon's back and landed on the deck with a thud, nearly collapsing from the adrenaline flooding her system. She stumbled forward, arms raised, shouting, "Stop. Do not shoot. It's with me." The sailors hesitated, eyes wild. Rasso lowered his sword, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. The dragon let out another roar, flames flickering at the corners of its jaws, daring anyone to make a move. Arya dashed to the nearest crossbowman and shoved his weapon down. "Do not," she hissed. "You'll kill us all." Chaos reigned for a few tense moments. The crew threatened to mutiny, to abandon ship, to do anything to rid themselves of the monster perched on the deck. The dragon's tail lashed, smashing a barrel of provisions. Arya pleaded, cajoled, demanded. "I swear it means you no harm," she insisted, though she could not entirely promise that if they provoked the dragon. Slowly, a fragile stalemate settled. The men backed away, forming a wide circle around the beast, weapons still in hand but lowered. The dragon hissed, eyeing them warily. Rasso stepped forward, sweat pouring down his brow. "What in all the hells have you brought us?" he rasped. That's a beast out of legend." Arya nodded, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. "We can't stay here any longer," she said, gesturing to the roiling plumes of smoke over Valyria. "The city's breaking apart again. I need you to set sail. Now." Rasso looked at the dragon, then at her, torn between horror, greed, and self-preservation. "And the dragon?" he asked, his voice quivering. Arya set her jaw. "It comes with us," she declared. The men erupted in protest, but another tremor shook the shore. Reminding them of the monstrous forces at work on the cursed landmass behind them. Valyria was not a place to linger. Amid much shouting, they hoisted the sails and began to navigate the treacherous waters away from the smoking city. The dragon remained perched on the deck, its body tense, wings partially spread to maintain balance on the rocking vessel. Arya stayed close, speaking softly, one hand resting on its flank, hoping to keep it calm. She felt the burn of every suspicious glare from the crew. She knew they feared that any moment, the dragon would lose patience and set them ablaze. Yet as hour after hour passed, the beast merely watched the horizon, exhaling occasional plumes of smoke, its tail swishing near the railing. Night fell, bringing cooler air and a faint starlight that filtered through the haze. Valyria's ruin receded behind them, a faint glow on the horizon marking the ongoing geological upheaval. Arya could hardly believe it. She had done the unthinkable, brought a living dragon away from old Valyria. Exhaustion hit her in waves. She dozed off in a corner of the deck, huddled beneath a spare sail. The dragon curled its tail protectively around her, keeping a watchful eye on the murmuring crew. By dawn, they were well out into the smoking sea. The sails creaked in the light wind, and the water lapped ominously at the hull. Strange vapors rose here and there, wreathing the boat in wisps of sulfur-scented fog. Rasso approached Arya carefully, as though she herself might breathe fire. "I've done as you asked," he said, his voice shaky. "But what now? Where do you plan to go with that creature?" She stared out at the vastness of the ocean. She had no clear plan, only a heart filled with possibility. North, she finally said, thinking of Westeros, of the place where her family once reigned, of the endless roads she had yet to travel. I want to see home, the captain gaped, glancing nervously at the dragon. You'll fly it across the sea? Arya shrugged, running a hand along the dragon's scales. If it's willing. If not, we'll sail as far as we can. But I'll find a way. She turned her gaze to the dawn, which burned through the fog with a fierce golden light. That same light reflected in the dragon's eyes, a mirror of boundless potential. In that glow, Arya could see a path opening before her, one that stretched beyond mere survival or vengeance. This was a future shaped by wonder, by a union with one of the most majestic creatures the world had ever known. She smiled despite the uncertainty, despite the fear gnawing at the edges of her mind. She was Arya Stark of Winterfell, a girl who had learned to be many things, and now she was something else altogether. A dragon's companion, a living link to the mysteries of old Valyria. The thought infused her with a sense of purpose unlike anything she had felt since before the war. She looked at the creature beside her and whispered, "Let's go find our fate." The dragon lifted its head, nostrils flaring, as though it too smelled the winds of change on the horizon. So they sailed away from the broken realm of fire and ash, carrying a secret that defied centuries of ruin. And though the road ahead was fraught with perils, fearful men, hungry kings, the uncertain whims of fate, Arya knew in her heart that a new chapter in her life had begun, one that might one day reshape the destiny of Westeros itself. In the rippling dawn, she wrapped her cloak tighter, felt the dragon's warm breath against her cheek, and let her mind race with the infinite possibilities of a future bound to a beast of legend. The sea stretched out before them, immense and full of promise, and in that expanse she felt the stirring of a grand adventure, a story only just beginning, written in the flame and blood of old Valyria with the fearless heart of a lone wolf at its center. Arya stood at the ship's railing with the wind whipping her hair across her eyes, her senses still reeling from the events of the last day. Old Valyria receded behind them, a malignant glow on the horizon, and though her heart still pounded from the chaos of their escape, there was an odd calmness in her veins. She glanced toward the dragon perched uneasily on the deck, its claws curling and uncurling in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Ash and soot dulled its dark scales, but nothing could diminish the raw power in its coiled muscles. Some of the sailors peeked at it from behind barrels or rigging, all of them maintaining a safe distance, crossbows and spears at the ready but lowered for now. Rasso, the scarred captain, stood at the wheel, muttering curses that the sea breeze snatched from his lips. His face was etched with worry and a confused awe that he tried to hide behind a grimace. Now and again he shot Arya a look as though searching for reassurance or perhaps trying to decide if he should toss her overboard along with her monstrous new companion. At a command from Rasso, the sailors adjusted the sails, desperate to put distance between themselves and the shattered peninsula. But the smoking sea was no gentle mistress. Strange eddies swirled in the depths, and the faint odor of sulfur lingered in the air. The sky had begun to clear, a pale wash of sunlight making the water glisten with an eerie sheen that reminded Arya too much of melted metal. She forced herself to breathe slowly to calm the frantic flutter in her chest. The deck rolled beneath her feet. Since she was a small girl, she had learned to gather her courage and press onward. This moment was no different. She let her gaze drift over the dragon, noticing fresh scrapes on its flanks from where it had landed roughly and the jagged scars raking its wing membranes. She made a mental note to gather salves and bandages as soon as possible. True flight would demand the dragon's wings be as healed as they could be, and the effort of escaping old Valyria had surely aggravated its injuries. Arya turned and headed to where her meager possessions were stowed, a rolled tarp by a hatch leading below decks. She kept the dragon in her peripheral vision the entire time, keenly aware that it might respond aggressively to any sudden movement from the sailors. None dared approach it yet. The men had not decided if they were more terrified of the creature or if they wanted to exploit its presence somehow. She crouched and opened her pack, taking out a small pot of ointment and a scrap of cloth. The ointment had been intended for minor burns or cuts. She had used it before on the dragon, though only in small increments to ensure it wouldn't irritate its scales. She crossed the deck, ignoring the wide-eyed stares, and moved slowly around the dragon's flank. It eyed her sidelong, letting out a faint growl of warning. She spoke in a low voice, barely more than a murmur, telling it she was here. She wouldn't harm it. She was going to help. Her tone, more than her words, seemed to settle it a notch. The dragon allowed her to place a gentle hand on its side, feeling the rise and fall of its breath. She dabbed ointment on the worst of its scrapes and raked tears. The beast emitted a low rumble in its throat, but did not lash out. During that odd ritual of care, the sailors looked on from a safe distance, exchanging hushed remarks. She heard snatches of conversation about witchcraft and dragon binding, and even an accusation that she might be a secret Targaryen. That last bit made her smirk. She was no dragon lord's daughter, but she could guess how the rumors might spread once they reached port. She decided she didn't care. Ever since she had first reached across the gap to feed the wounded dragon in the ruins, something about this bond had felt strangely right. As day gave way to a deep blue evening, the wind calmed, and Rasso managed to steer them past the last known reefs of that cursed region. The sails were slack. A hush lay over the sea, as if even the waves dared not raise their voices. Arya tried to catch some rest near the bow. For a time, she managed only to doze, but eventually sleep claimed her, leaving her swirling in dreams of stone towers and howling wolves and luminous red eyes in the darkness. She awoke to a shriek. Her eyes snapped open, and she shot to her feet, heart pounding. Dawn had barely begun to light the horizon, but the deck was in chaos. Sailors clustered near the center of the ship, brandishing weapons and shouting. One of them, a tall man with a snarl of black hair, had approached the dragon while Arya slept. The creature now bristled, bearing fangs, smoke rolling from its nostrils. She cursed under her breath and sprinted toward them, hand tightening on Needle's hilt. "Get back!" she yelled at the man, who was too foolish or too drunk to heed caution. He brandished a spear at the dragon, jabbing it forward in warning. "Get back!" Arya repeated, sliding in front of him before he could thrust the spear again. The dragon hissed, retreated a step, then lowered its head, preparing to lunge. She raised a palm toward the creature, speaking low. "Easy now," she murmured, her voice carrying the same soothing cadence she might have used for a skittish horse or a frightened dog. But this was no dog. The dragon's tail lashed violently against the deck, making the planks groan. The fool with the spear yelled something unintelligible about not wanting to be devoured. Rasso appeared, shoving sailors aside. "Enough," he bellowed, though fear edged his tone. He turned to Arya, his expression wild. "Keep that thing under control, or we'll have no choice but to fight it." Arya glared back at him. "No one has to fight anything if your men keep their distance." She glowered at the black-haired sailor who now stood in a defensive crouch. "It won't attack unless it feels threatened." She hoped that was true. The dragon let out a snort that expelled a small jet of flame, scorching the deck's edge. The man leapt back with a yelp. Arya whipped around, her heart in her throat, but the dragon did not pursue him. It merely held its ground, wings half unfurled. She took a measured step forward, placing herself between the man and the dragon. "Put down the spear," she said in a dangerously calm voice. "We've survived Valyria. Let's not die out here, fighting each other." The man's nostrils flared. His knuckles were white against the spear's shaft. Another chorus of protests rose around him, but slowly, uncertainly, he lowered his weapon. Rasso exhaled, tension sluicing from his shoulders. "We haven't the men to kill a dragon, even if we wanted to." He shot Arya a sharp glance. "I'm not sure how long we can keep this truce afloat, though." Arya nodded, ignoring the swirl of anger she felt at their distrust. "I understand. Let's see if we can't find a port soon, somewhere the dragon can disembark away from people. Or at least someplace it won't cause panic." Rasso's laugh was dark. "A dragon that won't cause panic? You truly think such a place exists?" She ignored the question. "Let's focus on sailing. There are ports along the coast of Essos that might accommodate us if we approach carefully. We're not that far from Volantis. And Volantis is massive enough that a single dragon might not spark an immediate riot if we're clever about it. The black walls might hold wonders, hidden corners, places where it could stay. And I can pay you for your trouble." He ground his teeth at that. You've coin. But it's not coin I'm worried about. It's whether we'll survive to spend it." The conversation ended as the dragon chose that moment to hiss again at the ring of sailors. Arya stared at them with narrowed eyes, and they parted, leaving her a path to the dragon's flank. She laid a hand on its scales. The creature turned its head slowly, glaring at the men but allowing her to stand beside it. She felt the vibration of its suppressed rage and the trembling of its muscles. It took every bit of willpower not to quake under that tension. But she held firm, stroking its neck in calming arcs. Night's shadows receded, replaced by an early morning gloom. The ship rocked gently as the wind picked up again, carrying them farther from the smoking peninsula. Eventually, the sailors returned to their tasks, though they avoided the dragon's side of the deck like it was a plague zone. Arya managed to coax the beast into a quieter posture, though every time a man passed, its gaze followed him, pupils slitted in suspicion. She whispered small reassurances, uncertain how much the dragon truly understood beyond her tone and presence. By midday, Rasso called her to the helm. She left the dragon curled near the bow, dozing but alert, and climbed the short steps to the quarterdeck. The captain spread a tattered map upon a barrel and jabbed his finger at the coastline. "We're here," he said, indicating a spot roughly west of the Isle of Cedars, or so he believed. "If we continue north, we'll reach the southern outskirts of Volantis. It's the greatest city in the region, though that also makes it dangerous. Especially with your new friend." He nodded toward the prow where the dragon's tail was just visible. Arya studied the map. Volantis has many gates, many enclaves. It might be easier to disappear, or at least hide the dragon for a time. But that doesn't solve what happens next. I need safe haven, someplace large enough that no one will try to kill us on sight, or else well guarded enough that they don't dare. Rasso blew out a breath. "I've seen how the wealthy of Volantis react to curiosities. They might treat you as a spectacle or try to imprison that monster for their own amusement. Or they might let you pass if you offer them something in return. Power, gold, or the promise of that dragon's loyalty. These men love to collect secrets and wonders. A living dragon is a prize beyond measure." Arya's mouth tightened. She loathed the idea of parading the dragon as a curiosity for the powerful to gawk at. "If we can slip into port quietly, gather supplies, and slip out again, that'd be ideal. I have no intention of remaining in Volantis." He tapped a finger against the map. "Easier said than done, but I suppose it's possible if you're quick. And if the dragon doesn't announce itself by roaring or breathing fire." They locked gazes for a moment. Then Arya nodded curtly and turned away, heading back across the deck. She could sense the tension in every corner of the ship, every coil of rope, every set of eyes that flicked her way. They were in uncharted waters, literally and figuratively. Yet for all the danger, a quiet excitement rippled through her veins, the same rush she used to feel when she slipped through the streets of Bravos in her faceless men training, or when she tested her skill with needle against foes twice her size. It was the exhilaration of standing on the precipice of the unknown. Days passed in an uneasy rhythm. Arya divided her time between caring for the dragon and trying to smooth the sailors' nerves, though the latter proved nearly impossible. Every night, she slept near the dragon, using its flank as a makeshift pillow, partly to reassure it and partly to keep watch in case any drunken fool decided he could slay the beast in the dark. In that period, she came to know the dragon's moods more intimately. She discovered that it tolerated her presence better than that of the men, that it would let her stroke its scales near the neck and rub the ridges around its head where the horns curved back. She realized it enjoyed the heat of the sun, and on calmer days it would stretch out its wings to catch the rays. She tested her Valyrian phrases now and then, murmuring them quietly. Sometimes the dragon seemed to perk up at the sound, as if faintly recognizing the ancient language. But still, she had no name for it, at least not one that felt right upon her tongue. At last, the silhouette of Volantis rose on the horizon. Even from a distance, Arya could see the mighty black walls towering above the sprawling mass of buildings. It was said that Volantis was older than many cities in the world, its heritage tied to the empire that once was Valyria's beating heart. Two great harbors waited on either side of the city along the River Rhoyne's final stretch to the sea. Countless ships came and went under the watchful eyes of the port's administrators. Slaves with tattoos on their faces would line the docks, laboring under the scorching sun, unloading goods from across Essos and beyond. Rasso set a course that approached from the south, hoping to avoid immediate scrutiny. The plan was fraught with pitfalls. Arya would need to conceal the dragon's presence, if such a thing was even possible, or at least lull it into a docile state long enough for them to secure the supplies they needed. She considered the idea of landing the dragon somewhere outside the city while she and Rasso went in by boat, but that carried risks of its own. The dragon could fly off or be discovered by some passing caravan. Ultimately, she decided they would attempt to dock at a smaller wharf used by less official commerce. Perhaps they could simply stay afloat, sending a few men for supplies. Yet she knew she'd be drawn to step ashore. She felt an obligation to see if there were any texts or lore about dragons in the old city archives. The mightiest library was rumored to be behind the black walls, accessible only to the highborn. But smaller markets and booksellers abounded in Volantis, and just maybe she could find a clue on how best to keep her newfound companion healthy and safe. As they neared the city, the water became busier with fishing boats, merchant vessels, and sleek pleasure barges. Smoke rose from 1,000 hearths, melding with the tropical humidity. An undercurrent of excitement ran through the ship's crew. Volantis was a place to sell goods, spend coin, and possibly vanish if one had unsavory business to attend to. But there was fear too, a sense that one misstep with the dragon could see them all arrested, enslaved, or worse. Arya found a moment's peace near the bow with the dragon, trying to calm it by feeding it scraps of salted meat. She cupped its jaw with her free hand, feeling the beast's breath as it rumbled quietly. She whispered, "We're going to land soon. It'll be noisy, crowded. You won't like it. But bear with me." The dragon blinked, gold and orange eyes reflecting the city's distant sprawl. They dropped anchor at a small inlet to the south, near a rundown quarter that reeked of fish, sweat, and muddy water. Ramshackle piers jutted out, manned by surly dockworkers with threadbare clothes and suspicious eyes. Rasso's men hoisted a tattered sail bearing no recognizable sigil, hoping to pass as a simple merchant crew. As the ship edged up to the pier, the dockworkers demanded coin for mooring, their voices bored, presumably used to dealing with smugglers. Rasso paid them off with a few ancient gold pieces from Arya's hoard of Valyrian relics. That made the dockworkers raise their brows, but they pocketed the treasure and stepped aside, uninterested in picking a fight they might not win. Arya took a measure of relief when no immediate alarm was raised at the sight of the dragon. She suspected the haze of the early morning and the height of the ship's rails concealed it somewhat. The beast itself seemed uneasy, prowling in the shadows behind crates. A few of Rasso's men, those assigned to guard it, shivered every time it hissed in their direction. Arya quietly told them to stay calm. She was the only one it trusted even a little, so she remained near. Rasso quickly organized a small party of sailors to procure fresh supplies, water casks, provisions, spare sails, anything that might fetch a good price or be needed for a longer voyage. Arya wanted to go ashore as well. She stuffed a small pouch of gold into her belt and turned to the dragon, who watched her with that intense, unsettling stare. She felt a tug of guilt. Leaving it alone among frightened men in a strange harbor felt risky, but bringing it along was simply impossible. She raised a hand, pressing it gently to its flank. "I'll come back soon," she murmured, and in a sudden burst of sentiment she touched her forehead to the dragon's shoulder. The creature let out a low rumble but didn't move away. She wasn't certain if it understood or just tolerated her. And so she disembarked, stepping onto the creaking pier with caution. Volantis lay ahead, a maze of tight alleys, broad avenues, canals, and countless shops. She slipped into the crowd, hood drawn low, and let herself fade into the bustle. The city's heartbeat was a cacophony of voices, donkey brays, the clatter of wheels on stone. Slaves scurried past bearing goods for their masters. Sellswards leaned against walls, hawking their services. Fishwives called out the day's catch. The patchwork tapestry of humanity reminded Arya of Bravos in some ways, but there was an undercurrent of cruelty here, the constant presence of slaves, the watchful eyes of overseers, the tattoos that branded entire classes of people. She walked for an hour, observing everything, tucking knowledge away. She noticed an old man with watery eyes selling dusty scrolls from a stall near a bridge. She paused, scanning the titles. Most were about commerce, genealogies of Volantine nobility, or old rhymes that might have come from the Rhoynar. But one battered scroll caught her attention. Its title was half-faded in High Valyrian. She carefully picked it up, gingerly unrolling the first few lines to see if it contained any mention of dragons. The ink was blurred by time, and though it was difficult to read, she caught sight of the word Dracaro. That alone made her pulse jump. She asked the price. The old man eyed her suspiciously, no doubt noticing her Westerosi accent. He rubbed his hands together and quoted an exorbitant sum. She bargained him down by flashing a glimpse of gold. With the deal made, she tucked the scroll away and resumed her exploration, her heart beating a little faster at the prospect of finding something that might help her care for the dragon. In the next few alleys, she found hawkers selling charms said to protect against fire and plague. She passed a group of slaves being herded along by a cruel-looking guard. Their faces were numb with resignation. She thought of how different it all was from the open spaces of the north, how different from Winterfell's courtyards or the silent expanses beyond the wall. Memories flickered through her mind of home, of family, of the wars she had endured. Her life had become a tapestry of journeys, each new thread leading her somewhere more improbable than the last. She reached a small plaza where men in colorful robes were haggling over the price of a caged leopard. A fountain trickled in the center, carved in the likeness of a scaled beast that might have been a stylized dragon. Arya found a quiet corner and unrolled the scroll she had just purchased, trying to decipher the ancient text. She had learned a smattering of High Valyrian phrases during her time in Bravos, enough to catch keywords, but this script was older, more archaic. She picked out references to fire, to forging, to binding two spirits as one. The lines were cryptic, but they spoke of a synergy between rider and dragon that required mutual trust and a recognition of each other's soul. It echoed what she had felt during her time with the dragon, that intangible bond. She felt a thrill of validation. She was so engrossed that she almost didn't notice the presence at her shoulder until a voice spoke. "That's a rare thing you have there." Instantly, her senses went on alert. She rolled the parchment tight and turned swiftly, eyes narrowing. A woman stood behind her, cloaked and hooded, her face partially concealed by a fine white veil. She had dark eyes that glinted with curiosity. "Forgive me for intruding," the woman continued softly. "I couldn't help but see the script." Arya considered her carefully, tension coiling in her muscles. "I didn't invite your curiosity." A slight laugh. "We're in Volantis, child. Curiosity is as common as cobblestones." She inclined her head toward the scroll. Old Valyrian texts draw certain eyes. Some are harmless, others less so. Arya's heart hammered, but she kept her gaze steady. "I'll keep that in mind." The woman lingered, as if testing how far she could push. Then she shrugged gracefully. "Your secret is your own. If you find yourself in need of help reading that, there's a small shop 2 streets over, run by a man named Temenko. He deals in old tongues. But be cautious, he's also known to deal in rumors, selling them to the highest bidder." Arya waited, suspecting the woman might want something more. But after a few heartbeats, the veiled figure offered a polite nod and slipped away into the crowd. Arya exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The city had eyes everywhere. She recalled that she had once trained to be a killer, taught to read faces and gather secrets. In this city, she would not be the only one adept at such games. Tucking the scroll back into her belt, she decided she had lingered long enough. She spent the rest of the afternoon gathering basic supplies, a sturdy waterskin, some salted fish, a small set of bandages and herbs that could be crushed into a salve for burns. She avoided the main thoroughfares, slipping through side streets and emerging at last near the dilapidated docks where Rasso's ship was moored. To her relief, the vessel still rode at anchor. No sign of immediate trouble reached her ears, but she remained vigilant. At the foot of the gangplank, she spotted a small cluster of sailors looking anxious. "What's happened?" she asked one of them, a wiry man with a gray beard. He looked over his shoulder, then leaned close, voice hushed. "Some men came by earlier asking questions about unusual cargo. They mentioned hearing rumors of a giant beast. We told them nothing, but they threatened to return with the city guard if they caught wind of anything suspicious." Arya bit her lip. "How long ago?" "An hour, maybe. They didn't see the dragon, thank the gods we draped those sails and crates around it, but I don't trust we're safe." He shot a fearful glance up the gangplank. Arya cursed under her breath. "We need to leave soon." But as she climbed aboard, she found Rasso pacing near the bow, the dragon dozing behind a makeshift barrier of canvas. The captain's brow was damp with sweat, his eyes darting. "We can't sail yet. The men haven't returned with enough fresh water or provisions for a long journey. We'd need at least another day to be safe." Arya set down the small crate of supplies she carried. "We don't have a day. The city guard might come any moment. If they see the dragon, they'll alert the Triarchs, or the Temple of the Lord of Light, or some other powerful faction. Then we'll be trapped or forced to fight." Rasso's voice cracked with tension. "Sail without enough water and we'll die at sea." Arya ran her fingers through her hair, frustration boiling. Her eyes flicked to the dragon. It seemed content for the moment, but one raised voice or one careless action could set it off. She wondered if it could fly them out of here as it had flown her out of Valyria, but it was too large now to carry her easily over city walls without being noticed, nor was it fully healed. The wingtears remained, though improved. She clenched her jaw. "Perhaps we don't need to remain together. Let some men keep loading water while the rest of us, myself and the dragon, move off the ship. If we can leave the city on foot or find a secluded spot, maybe we can reunite once you're done." But as she said it, the magnitude of the problem loomed. How does one walk a dragon through city streets without causing a stampede? Rasso snorted bitterly. "You're mad if you think you can just wander through Volantis with that monster in tow. The guard will be on you in minutes." Arya spun, feeling cornered. She stared at the dusty wharf, the labyrinth of buildings rising beyond. She recalled the interior of Volantis, the deeper enclaves along the Rhoyne's banks, the large open squares near the black walls. If she could navigate to the outskirts, maybe there were unpatrolled fields or deserted warehouse districts. The city was enormous, perhaps it contained hidden corners. We could try after dark, she offered. Fewer people on the streets, especially in the poorer districts. The dragon can fly short distances. If I guide it from rooftop to rooftop, we could slip away, maybe. The captain shook his head. You're describing a plan so full of holes that I hardly know where to begin. Arya gave a short, humorless laugh. And if we stay here, we risk the city guard or local warlords coming for the dragon. If they do, half your men will abandon ship or fight and die. We can't just wait for that. A muscle in Rasso's jaw ticked. He looked at her as though measuring whether to cut his losses and cast her off. But in the end, greed or loyalty, or perhaps his own sense of wonder won out. All right, he said at last. We'll gather what we can by nightfall. Then we'll weigh anchor. You do whatever you must with that beast, but for the gods' sake, do it away from the rest of us if things go sour. Arya nodded stiffly. They had reached a tenuous agreement. Without another word, she headed to the dragon's makeshift pen. Beneath the heavy canvas, it opened an eye, exhaling a blast of hot air that ruffled her cloak. She rubbed its snout gently, and it rumbled in response. We have to move soon, she whispered to it. I don't know how we'll do it, but we must. She thought of the old mosaic in Valyria, the sense of destiny that had washed over her when she first touched the dragon. Now, all that destiny felt mired in practical concerns, finding water, avoiding arrests, staying alive. Yet the flame in her chest had not dimmed. She would not give up on the dragon or her own path. For the rest of the afternoon, she stayed aboard, scanning the docks from behind barrels, watching for signs of unusual activity. Sure enough, near sunset, she spotted a small group of figures standing at the far end of the pier. They wore the colors of Volantis, or perhaps the cloaks were the deep red and orange of a mercenary band. They spoke with a few local dockworkers, pointing in the direction of Rasso's ship. The conversation ended with the dockworkers shrugging and the group turning away, but not before one of them shot a long, piercing look at the vessel. Arya's stomach churned. She hurried to the captain's cabin where Rasso was counting casks with two of his men. We have watchers, she told him. We can't wait until full dark. They know something's here. Rasso's face went pale. 7 hells. All right? We'll go with half of what we intended to gather. The men can survive if we ration carefully. They scrambled into action, hauling in the last casks, discarding non-essential cargo to make room. The sails were prepped and a hush of nervous tension fell over the crew. Everyone sensed that if they were caught now, any fight would be brutal and likely short. The dragon, sensing the flurry of activity, grew restless under the canvas. It shifted, scraping its claws on the deck, letting out a series of low growls. Arya stayed close, murmuring reassurance, urging it to remain calm. At last, the lines were cast off and the anchor raised. The old ship groaned as it pulled away from the pier, drifting into the wide channel. The watchers from earlier were nowhere to be seen, but that did not ease the dread curling in Arya's gut. They navigated upriver, away from the main harbor traffic, hoping to slip beyond the city's boundaries without encountering a patrol. The glimmer of torchlight reflected off the water, and the air was thick with the smell of fish and sewage. Rasso kept the sails partially furled, using poles to guide them along the darker edges of the river's flow. Occasionally, a passing barge or fishing skiff appeared and they would cease movement entirely, drifting until the silhouette of their vessel vanished into the gloom. But Volantis was not a city easily escaped. As they rounded a bend, they came upon a wooden checkpoint, a series of crude barricades, and a chain across part of the channel manned by half a dozen guards with torches. Arya's heart dropped. She and Rasso exchanged glances in the dim lantern light. There was no easy way to avoid the checkpoint unless they reversed course, which would only take them closer to the main harbor and potential watchers. The captain cursed under his breath, then directed the crew to bring the ship to a gradual halt. A guard shouted, "Who goes there?" from a small platform. Rasso answered in his best authoritative tone, "A merchant vessel carrying goods for the upper river. Delayed by tides." The guards, suspicious, demanded to come aboard. Arya, pressed to the dragon's side beneath the canvas, felt her mouth go dry. 2 men stepped onto the deck, torches raised. They peered about, noting the half-filled casks, the ropes, the haggard expressions of the crew. One of them stepped closer to the canvas covering the dragon. Arya silently willed him away, her heart thudding so loud she was certain the entire ship must hear it. The guard reached out to lift a corner of the canvas. Her muscles tensed, hand on needle's hilt, ready to do the unthinkable if it meant preventing him from seeing the beast. Before he could peel it back, Rasso spoke up, forcing a hearty laugh. "Careful, friend. That's our best stock of black pepper and saffron. Expensive, easily damaged by sparks from a torch. My men would kill me if a single ember ruined their profit. The guard paused, glancing at the captain, then at the crew who were eyeing him warily. Slowly, he let the canvas drop. Let's see your manifest. Rasso feigned annoyance, rummaging through a satchel until he produced some scribbled parchment that might pass for a cargo list. The guard frowned over it in the flickering torchlight, asked a few more questions. Eventually, perhaps finding nothing overtly suspicious, he handed the manifest back with a curt nod. He and his companion disembarked, but not before one last, measuring stare at the hooded figure, Arya, who lingered near the bow. They unchained the checkpoint, allowing the ship to pass. Arya held her breath until they were well beyond the torchlit barrier, drifting into the calmer darkness of the upper river. An immense sense of relief swept through her, mingled with guilt for having come so close to violence. The dragon shifted under the canvas, letting out a faint chuff, as if it too sensed the dissipating tension. They continued upriver for another hour, passing beneath low-hanging trees that creaked in the night breeze. A moon began to rise, silvering the water. Eventually, Rasso found a secluded bank where the reeds were thick and the current sluggish, and he guided the ship to rest there, tying it to an old stump. The crew exhaled in collective relief, though no one dared speak loudly. Arya moved to the stern, where she could peer back downriver at the faint glow of Volantis. She felt an odd pang of regret, recalling that she had not gleaned as much from the city as she wished. No chance to truly research the old texts. No chance to find a better salve for the dragon. But the plan had been doomed from the start. At least they had acquired some supplies. The night air was heavy with insects buzzing among the reeds. She jumped slightly at a soft noise behind her and turned to see Rasso, arms folded across his chest. "We'll wait here until morning," he said quietly. "Then head out at first light. If fortune is kind, we'll be far from Volantis by midday." She nodded. "We should be. But the watchers who came to the pier might still track us. Their superiors might guess we took the river route." Rasso's lips twisted in a half-sneer. "We'll be vigilant. But you'd best prepare if we have to fight. I've got crossbows, but a run-in with well-armed mercenaries or soldiers is a different matter." Arya fingered the hilt of needle, the memories of so many battles swirling beneath her calm facade. "I'll be ready." They parted ways, and Arya returned to the dragon, drawing back the canvas to let it breathe freely. The beast stretched, shaking out its wings with a rustle of membrane. In the moonlight, its scales gleamed like polished obsidian. Arya knelt, rummaging in a leather bag for the fresh bandages and herbs she'd bought. She began to reapply salve to the ragged edges of the dragon's wing, speaking softly, telling it they had faced danger but were safe for now, that soon they would find open skies and the chance to fly again. The dragon watched her, an ember glow in its eyes, and she felt that silent resonance she had come to associate with it, the sense that, in its own way, it understood her. She dozed by its side until dawn. At the first hint of light, Rasso roused the crew, and they pulled the ship away from the bank. The morning mist clung to the water, ghostly tendrils that swirled around the bow. They sailed upriver, the current growing weaker as they went. The land around them turned greener, dotted with small villages and farmland. They kept a wide berth from settlements, passing them at a distance whenever possible. Occasionally, they glimpsed silhouettes of people in fields or along the roads, but no one came close enough to pose a threat. For a while, it felt almost peaceful. The notion of gliding along the Rhoyne, the dragon sleeping under a makeshift shelter, reminded Arya of her simpler travels in the Riverlands with the Hound so long ago, though the presence of a legendary beast made it all far more surreal. She stared at the passing scenery, tangled forests, rolling hills, the occasional ancient ruin from the days when the Valyrian freehold had spanned this territory. She wondered how many secret enclaves might exist, how many hidden places might shelter her and the dragon from the prying eyes of the world. By midday, they stopped to refill casks at a clear tributary stream. The men were more relaxed now that Volantis lay behind them. Some even dared to approach Arya with cautious curiosity about the dragon. She fielded their questions, though she kept her answers terse. She trusted no one fully on this ship except maybe Rasso, and even that trust was tenuous. After they finished collecting water, they continued on. They spent 2 more days winding through the Rhoyne's lesser branches, encountering only a few trading vessels, none of which gave them trouble. Arya occupied herself by trying to decipher more of the old scroll she'd bought, gleaning bits about the interplay of mind and spirit necessary to direct a dragon's fire without words. The text was maddeningly fragmentary, referencing ritual phrases and certain illusions of the mind that might quell a dragon's rage or stoke its battle fervor. She practiced pronouncing the words under her breath, half hoping to see the dragon respond in some small way. The beast would cock its head at her, occasionally letting out a soft rumble, but whether it recognized anything more than the soothing tone of her voice was unclear. On the third day, the farmland gave way to wilder territory, thick forests pressed in on either side, and the river's path became a network of meandering channels. Rasso studied his maps, cursing at the difficulty of navigation. Arya felt a growing unease. Though they were farther from the large city, she worried about bandits or rogue mercenaries. The more remote the region, the more uncertain the laws. And always, she wondered who might have spread rumors of a dragon traveling by ship. Stories like that ignited the imaginations of many, Targaryen loyalists, power-hungry lords, or mere opportunists who believed capturing a dragon would bring them untold fortune. Late one afternoon, while the sky was gray and rumbling with distant thunder, Arya stood on the quarterdeck with Rasso. A hush had fallen over the crew. The river ahead spread into a small lake, the water smooth as glass beneath a leaden sky. Lightning flickered on the horizon. Rasso squinted, scanning the far shore. "We should find shelter before the storm hits," he muttered, gesturing at a cluster of large trees. But as the ship drifted closer, Arya's eyes caught a flicker of movement among the thick trunks. She narrowed her gaze. At first she saw nothing but the interplay of leaves, then a glint of metal. Her pulse kicked. A shout from the bow confirmed her suspicion. Riders on the shoreline, half hidden among the trees, carrying spears or bows. The riders made no move yet, just watched, but the tension in the air was palpable. Rasso barked at the crew to brace for trouble, ordering a few crossbows readied. Arya exchanged a look with him and nodded. She descended to the main deck where the dragon lay in the open air now that the day was warm. It sensed her urgency and rose, spreading its wings slightly. She placed a calming hand on its flank. "Easy," she said, though her own heart hammered. The shore was perhaps a bowshot away, the water's surface spitting occasional raindrops. One of the riders emerged more fully from the cover, a tall figure in mismatched armor, and called out something Arya couldn't make out. Rasso shouted back, "We're just passing through. No quarrel here." His voice carried over the water. A tense silence followed. Another flash of lightning rippled across the clouded sky, illuminating the riders' weapons. There were perhaps 10 of them in that small band, though more might be concealed behind the thick trunks. Arya glanced at the dragon. If these riders attacked, her best chance might be to have the dragon unleash a warning blast of fire. But such action would paint a giant target on them. Then again, a giant target was already on them if these brigands saw a chance for plunder, or if they suspected the presence of a valuable beast. The leader shouted again, something about tribute or tolls. Rasso leaned over the railing, responding with an offer of gold. The figure cackled, brandishing a spear in a gesture that clearly said they wanted more than just a few coins. Arya felt the shift in the dragon's posture, the sudden tension that radiated from its scales. It smelled conflict in the air. She glanced at the crew. They were pale, uncertain. She drew needle from its sheath with a whisper of steel, her eyes fixed on the riders. The man at the front barked an order, and a volley of arrows hissed from the shadows. They arced overhead and clattered against the ship's railing, a few thudding into the deck. One man cried out, clutching his shoulder. Rasso roared, "Return fire!" Several crossbow bolts whirred across the water, but most fell short or lodged in tree trunks. The dragon let out a shrieking roar that drowned the storm's distant rumble. Arya moved to quell its rising fury, but she was too late. The beast opened its maw, releasing a torrent of flame that rippled across the water in a dazzling arc. The riders on the shore shouted in alarm, some reeling back. Flames licked at the tree line, igniting shrubs and grass. Smoke billowed. A few of the brigands spurred their horses closer, loosing another wave of arrows. Arya ducked, pressing herself against the ship's railing, heart pounding. She felt the heat of the dragon's breath wash over her. Rasso cried out for the men to hoist the sails, to turn the ship away from the bank and catch any wind that might carry them beyond bow range. Amid the chaos, the dragon launched itself from the deck, wings beating the air. Arya gasped, scrabbling to her feet as the ship lurched. She saw the dragon glide over the water, trailing smoke from its maw. The archers below scattered, a few letting off desperate shots that clattered harmlessly against the beast's scales. Then came another roar of flame as the dragon strafed the shoreline. Horses screamed. Men dove for cover. The line of trees crackled with newly kindled fire. In that wild moment, Arya's instincts took over. She dashed to the side of the ship, scanning for a stable vantage to leap and possibly direct the dragon. The boat rocked violently as it caught a gust of wind, and she nearly lost her footing, only to seize a rope and steady herself. She glimpsed a body floating face down near the bank, likely one of the brigands consumed by flame. The stench of burning wood and flesh wafted across the water. The riders who still lived formed up, taking advantage of a shallow cove to approach. They waded in, horses sloshing belly deep, brandishing spears. Arya realized they meant to board the ship or at least get close enough to swarm it. She sprinted along the deck, calling to the men to stand firm. A crossbowman took aim and sent a bolt into the lead rider's chest, knocking him into the water. Another rider threw a spear that lodged in a crate near Arya, missing her by inches. She responded with a swift toss of her dagger, one of several hidden on her person. It found its mark in the man's throat, and he toppled from the saddle with a strangled cry. A raging column of flame suddenly blasted across the horses. The dragon swooped overhead, its roar deafening. The horses panicked, rearing, and a few pitched their riders into the muddy water. In seconds, the assault dissolved into a screaming rout. Some men tried to flee back into the trees, only to run into the encroaching fire. Others, half-burned, scrambled along the bank. The dragon circled overhead, exhaling short bursts of flame, preventing any attempt to reorganize the attack. On the ship, the crew seized the chance to push off the bank with long poles, catching the breeze that swirled before the storm. Arya rushed to the stern, shouting for Rasso to keep the sails angled. The boat drifted steadily into deeper water. The brigands no longer posed an immediate threat. Their ambush had been undone by a single pass of the dragon's fire. Lightning split the sky with a jagged fork and thunder rolled. Rain began to pelt the deck in large, fat droplets. The flames along the shore hissed and smoked, quickly reduced to steam and blackened patches. The dragon, satisfied or perhaps startled by the sudden downpour, flapped over the ship, searching for a place to land. Arya waved from the stern, hoping to guide it. The creature descended, claws scraping the deck, wings buffeting the rigging with wind and rain. She rushed to its side, ignoring the water drenching her hair and clothes. The dragon's flanks heaved with exertion and steam curled from its nostrils. She laid a hand on its scales, feeling the reverberation of its thunderous heartbeat. The crew was wide-eyed, panting from the sudden skirmish. Rasso wiped rain from his face, glancing at the scattered bodies on the shore. "Gods be good," he muttered. "So that's what it can do." His voice held both relief and terror. No one had died on their side, save for one man with an arrow wound that looked grave. Arya hurried to help him, rummaging for bandages amid the downpour. The men parted for her, too shocked or awed to interfere. As she pressed a cloth to the sailor's wound, she wondered how many more times this would happen. Every day they sailed with a dragon, they risked confrontation either from those seeking to kill them or those seeking to capture the creature. And if they pressed onto Westeros, what then? The Targaryens had once conquered entire kingdoms with dragons, and while she had no such ambition, the presence of one of these beasts in the Seven Kingdoms would be no small matter. Memories flooded her of the last time dragons had flown in Westeros, Daenerys Targaryen's campaign, the way entire armies had quailed beneath dragonfire. Arya was not blind to what her companion represented, a power capable of leveling armies, incinerating fleets, toppling strongholds. And here she was, a lone wolf, once a girl with a sword and a list of names, now tethered to a creature out of legend. When the immediate crisis subsided, the crew used the rain to wash the deck of ash and blood. The storm raged for another hour, then tapered to a drizzle. The dragon curled protectively near the stern, eyeing the drenched men as they went about repairs. One of the masts had a gash from a stray arrow, but it was manageable. They rigged a tarp over the wounded sailor, who drifted in and out of consciousness. Arya sat with him, staunching the flow of blood and thinking about how easily everything had almost ended. By morning, the storm clouds passed, leaving the air crisp and clean. The forested banks glistened. The scene of the previous day's carnage was mercifully behind them, though none would soon forget how a handful of brigands had nearly overtaken them before a single dragon's fury changed the odds. Arya heard whispers among the sailors, half fearful, half reverent. Some said they were blessed to have such a weapon on their side. Others said the beast was a curse, attracting the very violence it protected them from. None dared say it in front of her, but she caught the uneasy glances. Over the next week, the river narrowed further. Eventually, the waters became too shallow for Rasso's ship to proceed without constant risk of running aground. They anchored in a lonely stretch overshadowed by large cypress trees. Rasso approached Arya that evening, nursing a cup of foul-smelling grog. "We can't go much farther this way," he said in a low voice. "We'll have to turn around or find a different route." Arya thought about that. "We can't go back toward Volantis. That's madness. Do we have other options?" He rubbed the stubble on his jaw. "We could head west overland, cut through the disputed lands, or the hills near New Guise. But that's a war-torn region. Not ideal." He hesitated, as if unsure he wanted to voice his next thought. "Or we can make for the coast again and try to cross the narrow sea to Westeros. But that's a very long journey by water and we don't have the supplies for it." Her mind raced. A land journey would be grueling, especially with a dragon in tow. The alternative, a sea voyage around the southern coast, then up toward Westeros, would be equally perilous. She felt the press of choices without a clear solution. Her thoughts flicked to the possibility of letting the dragon fly as it had from Valyria, but that was hardly sustainable for such a vast distance, and the dragon was still not fully at peak strength. In the end, they decided to reverse course, sneaking back downriver under the cover of night and carefully skirting Volantis's domain at a greater distance, aiming to reach open waters to the east. The men were uneasy about returning even near the city, but it seemed less risky than continuing upriver into unknown territory. Arya took on the watch each night, standing near the dragon, scanning the dark banks for any sign of torches or movement. A sense of restlessness settled in her bones. She remembered traveling alone across Westeros, across the narrow sea, forging ahead with single-minded determination. Now, she felt anchored to this old ship and this handful of desperate sailors, all because she refused to abandon the beast that had chosen to trust her. As they made their way back, they encountered no further checkpoints. Perhaps the city had concluded they were mere smugglers, or perhaps the Watchers had turned their attention elsewhere. Still, she felt tension coiled in her gut until the day they rejoined the main channel leading to the sea. The reek of salt and mud told her they were close. Eventually, the wide horizon opened up before them, the waters merging into the summer sea. Rasso let out a triumphant curse as the open ocean breeze washed over the deck. The men set to work adjusting sails, glad to be on familiar waves again. The next challenge was to chart a course that avoided the major shipping lanes near Slavers Bay and other well-fortified ports. They wanted as few prying eyes as possible. Rasso spread a newer map on a barrel, tracing possible routes. Arya listened, her gaze flicking between the lines on the parchment and the dragon dozing near the stern. She wondered if, by some improbable means, they should attempt the direct crossing to Dorne. But that was a massive stretch of open water requiring more supplies than they possessed. They settled on heading southeast first, staying a safe distance offshore, then curving west past the Valyrian Peninsula. It was a circuitous route, but it might minimize encounters with trade ships or pirates. Arya could practically taste the risk in the salt air. She wasn't sure what they would do if they came under attack on the open sea, but she'd seen how a single pass of dragonfire could demolish an enemy. Perhaps that alone would deter would-be pirates. She found herself alone on the deck at sunrise one morning, the dragon perched at the rail, staring at the horizon with an almost meditative stillness. She approached slowly, letting her hand rest on the creature's flank. The warm scales reassured her. She had tried calling the beast by various Valyrian-sounding names in her head, but none felt true. Yet something stirred in her memory, an old story of wolves and dragons, of the bond that crossed lines of house and heritage. She recalled the name she had once given her direwolf, Nymeria, after a warrior queen. The memory glowed in her mind. She whispered, "Maybe I'll call you something that reminds me of home." The dragon turned its head, exhaled a puff of air that ruffled her hair. She smiled. "Not Nymeria, that name belongs to my wolf. But something else that speaks of the north. Winter's breath, or a name that conjures the feeling of fierce storms. Greywind was my brother's direwolf. Shaggy Og was my younger brother's. But you're not a wolf." She laughed softly at the notion. "No, you're all fire." For a heartbeat, she thought of calling it Ghost, but that was Jon's direwolf, and it felt wrong. So she fell silent, letting the naming remain an unspoken question. The dragon blinked, unconcerned with her musings, and resumed its vigil on the sea. Days passed in uneasy monotony. They glimpsed a few ships on the distant horizon, but none drew close enough to threaten or hail them. The men kept to their tasks, still wary of the dragon but beginning to accept that it would not roast them so long as they gave it space. Occasionally Arya caught them staring, all mingled with dread. She could not blame them. She had once felt the same fascination at the mere rumor of dragons. She scoured the battered Valyrian scrolls in every spare moment, deciphering more of the archaic words. Gradually, she pieced together a partial formula for bonding mind to mind, a set of phrases that might soothe or direct a dragon's impulses. Yet the instructions were incomplete, scattered. Some lines hinted at the significance of ritual sacrifice, which she refused to consider. Others suggested that the bond was as much about shared experiences as any spoken incantation. She remembered how the dragon had first allowed her touch, how they had flown together above the ruined city. It was not a matter of forcibly controlling the beast, but an exchange of trust. She had no illusions that trust would be a simple, linear path. But she believed they were forging it day by day. One evening when the sky was streaked with purple and orange, Arya stood near the helm, running her gaze over the infinite horizon. The breeze carried a hint of something spice, perhaps, or some inland aroma. Rasso sidled up, arms folded. "We're nearing a scattering of small islands," he said. "No major civilization there, just some fishing villages and unknown hazards. But it might be a place to take on water and let the men rest. I need to mend the sails, too." She glanced at him. "And the dragon?" He shrugged. "We'll keep it aboard or find a secluded cove if we can. Your call." She pressed her lips together. Each landfall they made risked discovery. But the men were worn thin, the sails in disrepair, and their water casks again running low. "All right," she said at last. "But we move quickly." By midnight, they spotted the dark outline of the islands against the starlit sea. The water grew shallow and they navigated carefully to avoid hidden reefs. A small, moonlit bay opened before them, flanked by rocky cliffs and a narrow beach. Rasso ordered the anchor dropped a short distance from shore. Arya scanned the silhouettes of palm trees, hearing the soft crash of waves. All seemed quiet. In the morning, with the sun bright and hot overhead, they ferried a few casks to the beach in a rowboat. Arya accompanied them, needle at her side, scanning the treeline for any sign of inhabitants. None emerged. A quick exploration revealed a trickle of fresh water from a rocky outcrop, enough to refill their casks. The men set to work, relieved to be on solid ground again. Rasso organized a small party to gather driftwood for repairs and to scout for fruit-bearing trees. Arya thought about the dragon left behind on the ship with a few watchers. She felt uneasy, but the crew had insisted it was safer to keep the beast away from potential forest creatures or hidden islanders. Yet as midday wore on, an insistent whisper in Arya's mind told her to check on the dragon. She ventured back in the rowboat with a single oarsman, the water slapping gently against the hull. The day was sweltering, the heat prickling at her skin. When she climbed aboard, her eyes widened. One of the watchers lay unconscious against a crate, blood trickling from a scalp wound. Another stood near the dragon, face pale as a ghost, attempting to calm the beast. The dragon snarled, smoke rolling from its nostrils, and battered one wing against the rigging, tangling it. "What happened?" Arya demanded, striding forward. The conscious man babbled. He tried to move the dragon. "We needed space to mend the sail. The rope must have startled it. It lashed out, knocked him over." Arya stepped in, carefully placing herself where the dragon could see her face, her posture non-threatening. The beast's eyes burned with agitation. She softened her voice, letting it flow in the gentle lilts of High Valyrian that she'd gleaned from the old text. She repeated a phrase that roughly meant calm, friend, calm. Slowly, the dragon ceased thrashing its wing, though it continued to growl. She approached, heart hammering, and placed a hand on its neck. Its scales were hot to the touch in the midday sun. She could feel its rapid breathing. Still, it did not snap at her. She beckoned the uninjured watcher to carefully free the tangled rigging. Then she knelt by the unconscious man, checking his pulse. He was alive, but likely had a concussion. She cursed softly, summoning a rag and water to clean the wound. The dragon loomed behind her, watchful but no longer violent. She wondered again if it truly grasped that some men could be allies, or if it simply saw them all as intruders save for her. The tension did not fully ease until Rasso returned with the others. At the sight of the injured man, he let out a stream of curses. Arya explained what had happened, though it offered little comfort. The men's nerves were wound tight as a drawstring, and more than one shot Arya accusing looks, as if it was her fault for bringing the dragon at all. She felt a flicker of anger but suppressed it, focusing instead on stabilizing the wounded sailor. With the help of the boat's meager medical supplies, she wrapped his head, forced a little water past his lips, and prayed the swelling would not worsen. For the next few days, they lingered in that bay, mostly for the wounded man's sake and to finish repairing the sails. Arya took the dragon ashore once, choosing a secluded stretch of beach away from the other men. She let it move freely, searching for any sign that it might hunt or explore. It seemed intrigued by the vastness of the open land, stretching its wings and letting out a roar that echoed off the cliffs. She watched, half in awe, half dreading what might happen if the beast decided to vanish into the sky. But it stayed near, occasionally stomping at the sand and sniffing at crabs scuttling by the waterline. She remembered Nymeria, how she had once run off into the wilderness with her pack, never to be truly tamed again. Pang hit Arya's chest, but she pushed it away. Each evening, she read more of the scrolls, practicing words that might deepen the dragon's acceptance of her. She fed it bits of fish they caught, mindful of the precarious peace with Rasso's men. Though they grumbled, they had no choice but to abide the arrangement. After all, the dragon had saved them from the brigands, and might yet save them again from future threats. When the wounded man was stable enough to travel, they loaded up and set sail once more. The dragon perched in its usual spot near the stern, overseeing the horizon like some ancient guardian. The days blurred together, an unending expanse of ocean, with occasional islands or rocky outcroppings. They avoided any major ports, though they skirted the shipping lanes near Lys and Tyrosh. More than once, Rasso spied sails on the horizon and changed course to avoid contact. Eventually, they rounded the southwestern curve of Essos, hugging the coastline far enough out to avoid towns but not so far that they lost all sense of location. Arya spent hours each day scanning the skies, a swirl of emotions flooding her whenever she remembered Westeros lying beyond the waves. She thought of Winterfell, of her brother Bran, now king, if the rumors were true. She wondered what Sansa would think of her returning with a dragon at her side. Perhaps it would be cause for alarm or wonder or something in between. One crisp morning, she roused early to find Rasso at the helm, studying the shape of the distant shoreline. "If we continue west," he said, "we can cross the summer sea, pass by the stepstones, and eventually come around to Dorne. But it's a long journey. We'd need to put ashore somewhere in the Stormlands if we make it that far. The narrow sea might be patrolled by pirates or militaries that won't hesitate to fire upon a ship suspected of carrying contraband. Like a dragon." Arya nodded slowly. She ran her fingers along the ship's rail. "I don't know what else to do," she admitted. "I have to go home. I feel it in my blood. Besides, the dragon deserves to see that land." He gave her a long, measured look. "What if you fly it?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. They had tried short flights, but the open sea was treacherous, and if the dragon grew tired, it would have nowhere to land except the ship. She wasn't sure about crossing vast distances, especially with no guarantee of rest stops. And she didn't want to abandon the men who had risked so much to bring her this far. But she said nothing, letting the question hang. They pressed on. The watery days turned to weeks. The stores of food dwindled again, forcing them to rely on fishing lines cast over the side. Arya spent more time tending to the dragon's wing, massaging salve into the old tears, encouraging it to flex. The beast allowed her close without protest, occasionally letting out a contented rumble. Its wing had improved, though a faint scar remained, a long, pale line of puckered flesh across the membrane. She noticed the dragon's growth was more apparent now, the ridges along its spine sharpening, its neck thicker. She sometimes caught the sailors measuring its size with anxious eyes, as if each inch spelled new dangers. One afternoon, they caught sight of a small cluster of islands rumored to lie near the Basilisk Isles. The men whispered about pirates, slavers, monstrous creatures said to dwell there. Rasso weighed the risks of landing. Ultimately, they decided to keep going, skirting the isles at a distance. Arya, scanning the jungles that sprawled across the horizon, felt a shiver as she recalled old stories of Sithorios, a land of plagues and horrors. She had no desire to test the legend's truth. The next great obstacle lay to the west, the open ocean crossing that would bring them at last within sight of Westeros's southern shores. Rasso gathered the crew one evening, explaining the journey. They would need favorable winds, no storms, and enough provisions to last weeks. Everyone understood it was a gamble, but the men had grown used to impossible gambles. They had ventured into old Valyria after all. If they turned back now, they would have nothing to show for their trials. Arya promised them gold, though she wondered how much coin she had left after so many bribes and purchases. She kept her tone resolute, masking her own doubts. When the final day arrived to leave the last known stretch of coast, they took on fresh water from a narrow stream in a deserted cove, foraged what fruits they could find, then set out. The sun was a molten disk sinking into the western waves as they caught the evening breeze. The dragon roared at the dying light, a grand echoing cry that made the men pause in their labors to stare. Arya stood at the rail, inhaling the salt wind, feeling an electric current of anticipation. This was the final leg of the journey. After so many travails, bravos, Winterfell, the War of the Long Night, the House of Black and White, the trek to Old Valyria, she was on her way back. Not just back to Westeros, but back with a companion no one could have foreseen. The crossing proved rougher than any had hoped. Winds howled and black clouds piled on the horizon, threatening storms. The ship groaned under the strain, sails snapping. Days of battered progress stretched into weeks, with no sight of land except for illusions that teased them at dawn or dusk. Men fell ill with exhaustion and scurvy, though Arya did her best to ration the meager stores of dried fruit. The dragon endured it all with a stoic calm, though it took to venturing short flights above the ship whenever the weather permitted, likely searching for prey or relief from the cramped deck. One evening, as a tempest howled around them, the dragon took flight before the worst of the wind struck. The seas rose in mountainous swells. Lightning shattered the sky and hail pummeled the deck. The men scrambled to furl the sails and keep the ship from being battered to splinters. Arya tied herself to the mast with a rope, clutching needle in one white-knuckled hand, though she had no real reason for the blade in such a storm. In the chaos, she searched the skies for any sign of the dragon, terrified it might be blown away or dashed into the ocean. She caught fleeting glimpses of a dark silhouette riding the gale, lightning etching its form in brilliant flashes. The storm raged through the night, the ship barely holding together under the onslaught. Water poured across the deck, lightning hammered the sea, thunder rattled the hull. When dawn arrived, pale and uncertain, the storm's fury subsided to a rolling swell. The sails were torn, some rigging snapped, the deck scattered with debris. Exhausted men slumped wherever they could, soaked to the bone. Arya's eyes scoured the sky in despair. No sign of the dragon. She freed herself from the mast, ignoring the ache in her muscles, and stumbled toward the prow. Her heart felt hollow. She was on the verge of searching the waves for any wing or tail that might be afloat. Suddenly, the watchers near the stern cried out. She rushed back, nearly tripping over broken crates. There, emerging from a bank of mist, flew the dragon, wings beating heavily, battered by the night's tumult. A ragged cheer went up from the crew, a startled but sincere cry of relief. The dragon descended, landing with a crash that shook the ship, sending a wave of water sloshing over the side. Arya hurried to its flank, letting out a trembling breath. The creature's scales were drenched, parts of its wings battered, but it was alive. She pressed her forehead against its shoulder, feeling the heat that still radiated from its body despite the cold. She half expected the men to recoil in fear or annoyance, but the emotional toll of the storm overshadowed any such reaction. They were merely glad the beast had survived. Sailing on became a test of endurance. Each day they repaired a bit more of the damage. Each night they prayed the storms would not return. The dragon offered a few moments of light by catching fish or other sea creatures near the surface, dropping them onto the deck for Arya and the men to cook. It was a strange, rough courtesy, as though the beast had learned that these men needed food as well. Arya marveled at that, seeing glimmers of intelligence behind the feral instincts. At last, after so long that Arya lost track of the days, a lookout shouted, "Land!" The cry rippled through the battered crew. Soon they saw it, a gray line on the horizon. As they drew closer, it resolved into rugged coastline. Tall cliffs, hammered by surf, stretched in either direction. Above them rose green hills, and beyond that, faint mountain peaks wreathed in cloud. Arya's heart soared. This was Westeros. She felt the press of tears, remembering how she had left as a restless girl, hungering for adventure west of the Sunset Sea. Now she returned from the far eastern edge of the world with a story few would believe. Rasso guided the ship along the coast, seeking a safer inlet. They found a small cove where the cliffs parted, revealing a stony beach. With the final synergy of wind and effort, they brought the ship in, dropping anchor just offshore. A few men rowed to land to check for inhabitants or safe mooring. They returned with news of an abandoned fishing hamlet, little more than a cluster of huts. It seemed deserted, perhaps ravaged by some earlier conflict. The men set foot on Westerosi soil with mingled relief and trepidation. Arya followed, her boots crunching on the pebble-strewn shore. She knelt, scooping up a handful of the stones, letting them trickle through her fingers. Home. The dragon circled overhead, then landed on the beach with a gust of wind that scattered pebbles. Arya approached it, pressing her palm to its scales. "We made it," she whispered. The beast blinked, its golden eyes reflecting the cliffs. For a moment, she imagined that it, too, felt a sense of arrival, even though this land was foreign to it, a place that had known dragons centuries past but not in her lifetime. Rasso and the men stood behind them, scanning the coastline. Some looked ready to part ways immediately, having fulfilled their contract or sense of obligation. Others, seeing the rugged land, were uncertain of how to find the next meal or the next coin. Arya turned to them, her cloak stirring in the sea breeze. "I promised you gold," she said, reaching for the pouch at her belt. Her coins were few now, but enough to cover their immediate needs. She divided them among the men, ignoring the pang of guilt that she could not give more. Rasso watched in silence, accepting his share with a guarded nod. One of the sailors, battered and scarred, asked, "What do you mean to do now?" His gaze flicked to the dragon. Arya inhaled, tasting the salt air of her homeland on her tongue. "I'm going north," she said. "To Winterfell." She pictured the ancient seat of her family, the gray walls, the hot springs, the crypts. She wondered if Sansa still held it or if someone else ruled in her stead. She wondered how they would react to a living dragon approaching their gates. Rasso shook his head slowly. "That's a long journey across half a kingdom. Or more. The Crownlands, the Riverlands. They'll all be in your way. With a dragon that can't go unnoticed." He sighed. "I suppose there's no talking you out of it." She met his gaze, her shoulders squared. "No," she offered a small, wry smile. "You've done more than enough, taken more risks than anyone could ask. You're free to stay or go as you please." He looked at the men, then at the battered ship bobbing offshore. "Some of us might try to sail to a port in Westeros, maybe sell the ship or find new patronage. Others, well, who knows? We're survivors." He paused, then extended a calloused hand. "I never thought I'd survive old Valyria, let alone see a living dragon. You kept your word as best you could." Arya clasped his hand. She thought of how they had met in that tavern in Volantis, both half-mad with ambition or desperation. "Thank you," she said simply, and she meant it. He nodded, releasing her grip. Then he glanced at the dragon once more, shook his head as if to clear a dream, and turned to speak with the crew, dividing supplies and coin. Arya stood with the dragon, letting the realization sink in. She was in Westeros again after so many years, carrying a secret that could reshape the realm's fate. The tide rolled in, hissing over the pebbles, and overhead gulls wheeled in the sky. At dawn the next day, Arya gathered her pack. She had a small store of dried food, a waterskin, and what remained of her gold. The dragon lay curled near the cliff base, half asleep, though it cracked open one eye as she approached. She put a hand on its snout, feeling the warmth of its breath. "It's time," she murmured. She closed her eyes, recalling how they had soared over Valyria's ruins. This land was far less desolate, but the perils might be just as grave. She wondered if the roads were safe or if remnants of the wars still lingered. She wondered how the small folk would react to the sight of a dragon overhead. Would they flee, or would they recall Daenerys Targaryen's reign with horror? She walked north along the beach, the dragon trailing her. Rasso and most of his men decided to remain in the area for a few days to salvage what they could and possibly sail to a more populated harbor. She bid them farewell, each uncertain about the future. One or two of them, lacking direction, asked to follow her, but she gently insisted it was too dangerous and uncertain. She had no illusions that traveling with a dragon made life easier. They found a narrow path leading up the cliffs, and the dragon hopped awkwardly over a few rocky outcrops, using its wings for balance. Once at the top, they beheld a rolling plain, dotted with patches of forest and winding streams. The road was little more than a dirt track leading inland. Arya felt a swell of emotion. So many memories pressed in on her. The last time she had walked these lands, she was a fugitive child with a sword too big for her, a heart full of vengeance. Now she stood as a grown woman, shaped by death and life in equal measure, with a dragon at her side. She took a steadying breath and set off along the track. The dragon padded behind, sniffing the air. Occasionally it would flap up to a ridge or outcropping to get a better view, then glide back down to her. She realized it was sizing up this new territory, as much a scout as a companion. The grass waved in a gentle breeze and the sky stretched wide and pale overhead. They walked for hours, seeing no sign of human habitation. Birds startled at the dragon's approach and flew off in flurries of panicked calls. Now and then she paused to let the beast drink from a stream or snatch at a passing hare with startling speed. She was glad for its hunting ability. Carrying enough provisions for both of them would have been impossible. She only hoped it would not terrorize local livestock when they neared farms or villages. In the late afternoon, they crested a low hill and spotted smoke rising in the distance. Arya's stomach tensed. Where there was smoke, there might be a settlement. She considered skirting it widely, but part of her needed to know the state of the realm. She guided the dragon to a small thicket, instructing it to wait, though she had no idea if it truly comprehended. Nevertheless, the beast settled, folding its wings. She patted its flank, then walked on alone, hoping it would remain there. As she neared the source of the smoke, she saw a small village, perhaps 24 huts, a rough palisade, fields of barley. Farmers worked under the waning sun, though they moved sluggishly as if tired or dispirited. A single guard stood at the makeshift gate, holding a spear. Arya approached, hood drawn low. The guard looked up, startled to see a stranger. "Halt," he said, though his voice wavered. "Who goes?" Arya did not draw her weapon. She lifted her head, meeting his eyes. "Just a traveler," she answered quietly. "I've come from far away." He eyed her travel-worn clothes, the sword at her hip, the scars visible on her hands. "We get few travelers these days. Which side did you fight on?" She blinked, uncertain. "Side?" "The war," he said, as though it was obvious. "The lords keep fighting over who's in charge. One day they say we owe taxes to one banner, the next day it's another. The small folk suffer." Arya felt a surge of dismay. She had hoped the realm would know peace by now, with Bran on the throne. But perhaps in distant corners, chaos persisted, petty lords vying for scraps of power. She forced her voice to remain calm. "I fought for no one but myself," she said simply. "I just need news. And maybe a place to rest." The guard's posture softened. "We can spare a bit of bread, but not much else." He opened the gate, and she stepped inside, eyes sweeping over the meager dwellings. Chickens clucked. Children peered from behind a fence. She could almost be in the riverlands again, drifting from village to village. An old woman approached, leaning on a cane. "Another refugee?" she asked, eyeing Arya. "We've no room left in the huts, but you can sleep by the hearth if you've the coin for a meal." Arya nodded, digging into her pouch. She produced a small coin, offering it. The woman examined it, then shrugged. "Good enough. Come in." They led her to a central hut where a small fire crackled. The interior was cramped, smoky. A few villagers huddled around bowls of thin stew. Arya accepted a bowl, tasted it, trying to keep her expression neutral at the watery flavor. She sank onto a stool, exhaustion creeping over her. Outside, she could sense the sun nearing the horizon. The dragon waited for her in the thicket. She hoped it wouldn't wander into the village seeking her out. She listened to the locals chatter about bandits on the road, about newly minted lords claiming these lands, about old feuds. She gleaned that King Bran's rule was recognized in the central and northern parts of the realm, but remote regions still faced power struggles. A murmur of relief filled her chest at the mention of Bran. At least he was indeed king, as the rumors in Essos had implied. But she worried about the fractious state of the land. When night fell, she tried to rest on a straw pallet near the hearth, though the smell of unwashed bodies and the sound of coughing children kept her half awake. She eventually slipped out into the cool darkness, telling no one. Lantern light glowed in a few hut windows, but the village was quiet. She passed the guard at the gate, who dozed against his spear. Then she walked under moonlight back to the thicket where she'd left the dragon. She found it awake, muzzle lifted toward the stars as though it had sensed her coming. She couldn't risk building a fire, so she hunkered down by its side, letting its body warmth drive away the chill. She told it softly what she had learned, that the realm was still unstable, that they would need to be cautious. She wasn't sure why she felt compelled to share news with it, but it gave her comfort to speak the words aloud. At dawn, she collected her belongings and slipped away from the village before most were awake. She left a few coins under the pallet as further payment for the stew she had eaten. She had no wish to linger and draw attention. The dragon followed her at a distance, occasionally darting overhead in short flights. Villagers, if they chanced to look up, might see a winged shape gliding over the treetops. But perhaps they would dismiss it as a hawk or a trick of the light. Or perhaps rumor would spread, as rumor always did. Arya couldn't control that. The next weeks became a long trek northward, sometimes along old roads, sometimes across open fields. Each day the air grew cooler. Occasionally they encountered travelers, a ragged merchant caravan, a band of Sel's words, small folk fleeing some threat. Arya kept her distance, letting the dragon remain hidden in copses of trees or behind ridges. Twice she had narrow escapes from men who might have recognized the shape in the sky and sought to investigate. She learned to move at dawn or dusk, letting the dragon fly only at night unless absolutely necessary. Through farmland and forest, across shallow rivers and stony hills, she pressed on. She felt each step carrying her closer to Winterfell. Memories haunted her, the courtyard where she had once practiced archery in secret, Ned Stark's stern but loving smile, the weirwood tree in the godwood with its carved face. She wondered if Sansa still lit the old hearths, if the library had been restored, if the northern banners still flew proudly on the ramparts. Sometimes at night she dreamt of confronting the Lady of Winterfell, whoever that might be now, and revealing the dragon. Would they recoil in fear? Or would they see it as a symbol of the alliances once formed in the war against the dead? She had no illusions that having a dragon automatically bestowed loyalty upon her. Westeros had a fraught history with such creatures. But she was Arya Stark and she had never been easily daunted. One chilly dawn found her standing at the crest of a ridge, the wind biting her cheeks. The dragon perched behind her, tail swishing. Below stretched an expanse of rolling plains, and beyond that she could just make out a haze of smoke that might indicate a town or castle. The shape of the land felt familiar. A memory stirred of riding with her siblings in the wide fields south of Winterfell, the wind in her hair, youth in her blood. Her pulse quickened. She guided the dragon down the slope, weaving through sparse clusters of trees. At midday they came upon a well-used road leading north. Arya recognized signposts, though they were weather-worn. A sense of unreality crept over her. She was almost home, yet so much had changed. She could see travelers ahead, wagons bearing goods. She veered away, not wanting to provoke alarm if the dragon was spotted. They trailed the road from a distance, using the cover of gentle hills. The sky grew overcast, and a fine misty rain fell. The dragon huffed at the dampness, but endured. By evening she caught her first distant glimpse of Winterfell's walls. A wave of dizzying emotion struck her, so intense she had to stop walking. She pressed a hand to her face, breath quivering. The walls looked taller, or perhaps she was smaller in her own eyes. Smoke rose from chimneys, torches glimmered along the battlements. For a moment she felt the presence of her father's spirit, her mother's, even her siblings' laughter echoing in the courtyard. The dragon rumbled softly behind her as though urging her onward. She swallowed past the lump in her throat and pressed forward, skirting farmland and outer holdings. She saw lights in a cluster of huts that must have been the expanded new town. The farmland was more extensive than she remembered, suggesting prosperity had returned. At the edges of the farmland she paused. If she walked openly with the dragon at her side, the alarm would be sounded. Archers might line the walls. She needed a plan. She found a thick copse of trees near a stream, a league from the castle. There she instructed the dragon to wait, pointing to the ground, repeating the Valyrian phrases for remain, friend, safe. It seemed restless, shifting its weight. She placed a hand on its snout, looking into its molten eyes. "I'll be back," she whispered. "I need to go first, see if it's safe." Slipping through the twilight, she approached Winterfell on foot, hood drawn. She saw the gates guarded by men in northern cloaks, the sigil on their banners a gray dire wolf. Relief and pride warmed her. How Stark still held Winterfell. Slowly she made her way to the gates, heart pounding as if she were a little girl again, running through the corridors. 2 guards stood watch, spears in hand. One stepped forward, calling a halt. "I'm Arya Stark," she said softly, pulling back her hood. The guard's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed with scrutiny. Arya held herself tall, though her clothes were worn, her face weathered by travels. She had stark features, the shape of her face reminiscent of her siblings, but she knew time had changed her. "I want to see whoever's in charge." The guard sputtered. "Arya Stark?" "But Lady Arya's been gone for years," presumed. He stopped, uncertain. A second guard, older, stepped forward, peering at her intently. After a tense moment, he bowed his head. "The face is different, but by the gods, it might be you." He waved for the gate to open. "Come in, my lady. The castellan will want to see you at once." She walked through the gates, heart fluttering. The courtyard opened before her, so familiar yet changed. Buildings had been rebuilt or expanded. The walls bore signs of repairs from past battles. She smelled the comforting scent of wood smoke from the great hall. She saw stable hands leading horses, scullions rushing with baskets of vegetables, a flurry of ordinary life that made her head spin. A cluster of soldiers approached, confusion written on their faces. She declared herself once more, and they exchanged startled looks. One of them hurried inside the keep, presumably to fetch someone with higher authority. Arya stood there, feeling every moment stretch, noticing the stares from passers-by. Then a figure emerged from the keep, a tall woman with auburn hair lightly streaked with silver, dressed in furs. Sansa. Arya's breath caught. Sansa was older, yes, but the set of her shoulders and the curve of her face were unmistakable. She exuded calm authority. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Sansa's eyes softened and she crossed the courtyard in swift steps. Arya felt her own throat tighten as they faced each other. Words failed her, and for an instant she was that little sister again, uncertain how to greet a sibling she'd once bickered with. Sansa's mouth parted. "Arya," she whispered, voice cracking. A wave of emotion crashed through Arya. She stepped forward and they embraced. It wasn't the stiff hug of strangers but the fierce grip of sisters who had been sundered by war and fate for too long. She felt Sansa's body trembling. She closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her. At length, Sansa drew back, searching Arya's face, tears in her eyes. "I never thought. I feared you were dead." Arya swallowed hard. "I nearly was, so many times. But here I am." She glanced around, feeling a tug of both joy and foreboding. "I have a lot to tell you." Sansa nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Then come inside, get warm. The gods know we have stories of our own." She guided Arya into the keep, past gawking onlookers. Servants bowed, confusion and excitement rippling through the halls as whispers of Lady Arya's return spread. Arya barely registered the familiar corridors as they walked. Her mind spun with what she needed to explain: her journeys, her time in Bravos, the dragon waiting in the woods. Sansa led her to a private solar where a fire crackled in a large hearth. The walls bore tapestries of wolves and northern scenes, some new, some old. A table sat laden with bread and a steaming pot of soup. Once the door closed, Arya sank into a chair, exhaustion hitting her like a wave. Sansa sat opposite, hands clasped tightly. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then Sansa laughed shakily, a mixture of relief and disbelief. Arya felt a hesitant smile tug at her lips in response. "You've grown so much," Sansa said softly, her gaze roving over Arya's face. "But the eyes are the same." Arya's chest constricted. She fiddled with needle's hilt, not sure where to begin. Memories crowded her. Father's execution, her flight from King's Landing, the long nights alone on the road, the many faces she'd worn. Now she was back in the seat of her family's power, with a secret that might change everything. She met Sansa's gaze, seeing no judgment there, only compassion. "There's something I must tell you, something you have to see for yourself," Arya said finally, voice trembling with urgency. "I haven't come back alone." Sansa tilted her head, confusion flickering. "What do you mean? Did you bring an army, or friends from across the sea?" Arya swallowed, steeling herself. "No. I brought a dragon." Silence fell in the solar, broken only by the pop of a log in the hearth. Sansa blinked as though uncertain she had heard correctly. Arya pressed on, explaining haltingly how she had ventured to old Valyria, how she discovered a wounded dragon, how their bond formed, and how they crossed the seas to return. Sansa's eyes grew wide, disbelief warring with the trust she had for her sister. Eventually she stood, pacing by the hearth, arms folded. "A dragon," she repeated, voice laced with awe and concern. "But Daenerys's dragons? We thought they were the last. Are you certain it's real and not?" She trailed off, shaking her head. Arya rose, stepping toward her sister. "I can show you. It's waiting in the woods beyond the farmland." "I need your help, Sansa." "The realm, Bran's realm, what will it do when word spreads that a new dragon is in the north?" Sansa pressed her lips together. "Panic, perhaps? Or try to use it. You know how lords are. They'll see an opportunity for power or a threat. But you're a Stark and this is Winterfell. The North might rally behind you or at least accept the presence of the dragon if we handle this carefully." Arya nodded, relief mingling with the weight of responsibility. "I have no desire to wage war. I just want to protect it, protect us, and find my place here." Sansa placed a hand on Arya's shoulder. "You're home, Arya. That's all that matters. We'll figure the rest out." They embraced again, the warmth of sisterhood filling the gaps of years lost. Outside, the wind whispered around the old walls, carrying with it the promise of a new chapter in the North's history. Arya thought of the dragon waiting under the northern sky, of how its flame might one day illuminate the darkest corners of the kingdom or cast new shadows. But for now she let that worry drift. She was Arya Stark, home at last, with a dragon born of old Valyria's ruin, forging a future unknown to all the world. That night, the halls of Winterfell whispered with the news of Arya Stark's return. Servants scurried with wide eyes, trading rumors in hushed tones, while guards peered into the darkness beyond the walls as if expecting some fantastical creature to swoop down at any moment. Yet for all their feverish speculation, none dared confirm what they only half believed. Sansa had revealed nothing. She merely instructed the staff to prepare guest chambers, to make sure the kitchens stayed open through the night, and to carry on. Winterfell had endured countless upheavals. This would be no different. Arya stood with Sansa in a private solar, arms folded against the chill. A brazier glowed in the corner. She was both restless and bone-weary after her travels, after so many years of unimaginable hardship. Her hair, damp from a quick wash, clung to her temples. Her body craved a true night's sleep in a safe bed, but she could not rest yet. She had left the dragon in the woods alone, and every minute spent in the keep made her anxious. Sansa sensed it. She poured mulled wine into a cup and pressed it into Arya's hands. "You look like a person braced for a fight," she murmured. "Sit." Arya let out a soft breath, lowering herself into an armchair near the hearth. She felt the ghosts of her past in every corner of this castle, her mother's voice drifting through these hallways, her father's measured footsteps. The memories tugged her emotions in all directions, though she tried to hold them at bay. Sansa settled in the chair opposite, the warm glow of the fire dancing across her face. "When I look at you, I see a different person from the girl who left." Her voice was gentle, but there was a searching note in it. "I'm sure you have stories to tell, but I don't want to overwhelm you." Arya set the cup aside, swirling the wine absently. "I've done so many things I never expected I would," she said softly. "I trained with the faceless men in Bravos. I sailed west, then east, chasing rumors. I saw horrors in Valyria. Yet here I am." She lifted her eyes to meet Sansa's. "And you've been here, bearing the weight of the North. I see it in your posture. You're strong. You have to be." Sansa offered a wistful smile. "We've all done what was necessary. The North was broken after the wars. We had to rebuild. Bran helped from the Iron Throne as best he could, but there were still raiders and petty lords fighting over scraps of territory. I stayed to hold Winterfell for our family." She paused, her eyes bright with emotion. "When word came you were alive after the long night, then rumors that you'd traveled the world, I hoped you'd return. But I never imagined this." They fell silent, the only sound the crackle of burning wood. At last Arya stood. "I can't stay here while my companion waits outside the walls. The dragon is alone. It trusts me, Sansa, but I don't know how it will react if I leave it for too long. And we need a plan." Sansa rose too, nodding. "I'm coming with you." A protest rose to Arya's lips. She feared the danger. But one look at Sansa's steady gaze quashed it. "All right." They left the solar by a side door, a route that kept them clear of watchful eyes. Down narrow corridors and steep stairs they went, passing through the outer bailey. A pair of guards tried to hail them, but Sansa shook her head, leaving no doubt they would not be followed. The men bowed, uncertain. Together, the sisters made their way to a small postern gate that led to the open fields. Outside, a pale moon cast silver light on the landscape. The farmlands stretched north and west of Winterfell, dotted with rolling hills, stony outcrops, and small patches of woodland. Arya guided Sansa over a low fence, across a meadow, then up a gentle slope. Her heart thudded harder with each step, anticipating the moment Sansa would see the dragon for herself. It was one thing to speak the words, it was another to stand in the presence of living fire. They reached the copse of trees at the crest of a hill. The night air smelled of pine and damp earth. A soft rustling greeted them, a slow scrape of something large shifting its weight. Sansa slowed her pace, eyes darting through the gloom. Arya raised a hand, signaling caution. "It's here," she whispered. She slipped between the trunks, Sansa at her shoulder. The darkness parted around the shape of a creature lying on a bed of crushed pine needles. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the moonlight like two embers. Sansa drew a sharp breath. Even though the dragon was not massive by the standards of legends, no longer an undersized hatchling, yet still far smaller than Drogon or Viserion had been, the sight was enough to seize the breath of anyone seeing a dragon for the first time. The swirl of dark scales, the curl of a barbed tail, the faint trickle of smoke from its nostrils. Arya approached, speaking softly in that half-Valyrian murmur she had practiced. The dragon recognized her voice at once, lifting its head. She placed a hand on its flank, feeling the steady warmth, the subtle tension in its muscles. Then she looked back at Sansa, who stood rooted to the spot. A swirl of moonlight showed both fear and wonder etched on her face. How Sansa breathed. Her voice faltered under the weight of the moment. She drew nearer, tentatively extending a hand but stopping well short of touching. The dragon sniffed the air, swiveled its head to regard her. For a heartbeat, Sansa tensed, ready to flee if it showed aggression. But it only exhaled a puff of hot breath that ruffled the hair at Sansa's temples. Sansa swallowed. "I didn't truly believe it until now." Arya nodded, stroking the dragon's neck. "I found it in old Valyria. It was wounded, alone. We bonded, I suppose." Her voice softened. It's been through so much. It only trusts me. But you're my sister. Maybe in time it will come to trust you too. Sansa's posture eased. She looked at the dragon with profound empathy. Old Valyria. Gods. I can't imagine what you saw there. Arya said nothing for a moment, memories of ashen ruins and sulphurous fumes drifting through her mind. Then Sansa reached out again, more boldly this time. The dragon's nostrils flared, and it moved its snout closer, as if to inspect this new human. When Sansa's fingers brushed the scaly hide, the beast gave a low rumble. She pulled back, startled, but Arya smiled. That's a good sign, she said. It's letting you near. Sansa let out an unsteady laugh, stepping back. She folded her arms, gazing at the creature with a flicker of awe. We should talk about how we handle this. If the North discovers a dragon near Winterfell, people will panic. Some might see it as a threat, others might see it as power they want to claim. Arya brushed her hand along the dragon's side. I have no intention of letting lords or knights turn it into a weapon. It's free in a way no one here can truly understand. But I don't want to hide it forever. This is my home, and the dragon has nowhere else to go. Sansa studied her sister in the moonlight. Bran is the king of the Six Kingdoms, and the North is independent now, thanks to Queen Sansa's negotiations after the wars. She paused, a slight smile tugging at her lips, an echo of pride at the memory of how she had won independence for the North. We govern ourselves, but in truth the realm is still connected. Word will spread beyond these lands. Arya nodded. Then let them talk. I'm tired of running. She exhaled, turning her gaze to the silhouette of Winterfell's walls in the distance. But we'll do it carefully on our terms. They lingered a while longer, discussing strategies under the star-flecked sky. Sansa suggested introducing the dragon slowly, perhaps letting a few trusted people, like Maester Gorman or some senior knights, witness it first so that they could help calm the populace. Arya worried about drawing too many eyes, but she recognized Sansa's experience in governing. Ultimately, they agreed to gather a small circle of confidants the next night. Before they parted, Sansa took one last look at the dragon. How does it talk to you? She asked Search. ING for words. Is it just your voice it responds to? Arya hesitated. It's not speech, not exactly. More like an understanding. I can read its moods, sense its hunger or its anger. It doesn't speak, but we share something deeper than language. She brushed her palm against the dragon's scales, feeling its heat like a living flame. I never thought I'd have a bond like this. But it happened, and I can't turn away from it now. Sansa nodded, a swirl of thoughts passing behind her eyes. Then she quietly withdrew, leaving Arya to keep watch. Arya settled onto a patch of grass beside the dragon, its body heat warding off the northern chill. Despite her exhaustion, she struggled to fall asleep, her mind teeming with anticipation and lingering unease. Being home was both a comfort and a danger, for she knew the North might not readily welcome such a creature, no matter whose sister she was. In the morning, she slipped back through the postern gate. The guards stiffened at the sight of her, uncertain whether to challenge a Stark. She offered them a curt nod, enough to convey that she was not to be questioned. Sansa was waiting in the courtyard, cloak wrapped tight, the crisp northern air pinching color into her cheeks. They exchanged a brief, meaningful glance before Sansa guided her inside to a small council room. Seated around a sturdy wooden table were several individuals of note in Winterfell. Arya recognized Lord Glover, older and grayer than she remembered, Maester Gorman, a kindly man in his middle years, and Ser Edric Fenn, a knight sworn to House Stark. A few others stood behind them, including a steward and a guard captain. The hush when Arya entered was palpable, the curious stares prickling her skin. Sansa took her place at the head of the table, gesturing for Arya to sit beside her. "Thank you for gathering," Sansa said quietly. "We have something to discuss that requires complete discretion." Their gazes shifted to Arya. Lord Glover cleared his throat, eyeing her with equal parts respect and wariness. "Lady Arya, it warms my heart to see you alive after all these years. We'd heard rumors of your travels, but I never expected your return in such a manner. Lady Sansa says you've brought news?" Arya lifted her chin. She noticed how Sansa had not informed them about the dragon outright, which might have caused panic. Instead, she allowed Arya to broach it herself. "I have indeed returned," Arya said, her voice calm yet firm. "But my news is extraordinary. During my travels, I found a living dragon. I have brought it here, to Winterfell. Shock rippled through the room. Ser Edric nearly lurched from his seat, eyes wide. Lord Glover blanched. Maester Gorman's brow furrowed in skeptical curiosity. Only Sansa remained composed, though tension around her eyes betrayed her own concerns. Voices erupted in a flurry of exclamations and half-questions. A few demanded how, others demanded why. Arya let the clamor die of its own accord before continuing. I found it in old Valyria, she said. It was wounded and alone. I nurtured it and we crossed the seas together. It is young by dragon standards but growing quickly. And I won't hide it away or abandon it. She paused, letting the seriousness settle over them. I came home because I trust Winterfell. And I trust our family. Maester Gorman tapped his fingers on the table. We all know the stories of the Targaryen dragons, what they did to entire armies and castles. The North remembers. Is this beast tame? Arya shook her head. Not tame in the sense you mean. A dragon is never truly tamed. But it's bonded to me. I can keep it from harming innocents so long as no one provokes it. It saved my life more than once. I owe it my loyalty just as it owes me its trust. Lord Glover, still pale, pressed a hand to his temple. God spare us. We remember the last time dragons came north. The devastation at the Trident, the madness that followed. I don't wish to disrespect you, Lady Arya, but how can we be sure this creature won't bring ruin upon the north? Sansa answered for her, voice cool. We haven't endured all we have just to invite disaster, my lord. But House Stark does not abandon its own. And Arya, my sister, has returned with this creature. As Lady of Winterfell, I pledge we will face this together with caution. That's why you are here, to help us decide the next steps so that we avoid panic and strife. A low murmur of agreement passed around the table, though fear still flickered in their eyes. Maester Gorman steepled his fingers as though gathering his thoughts. This is unprecedented in our time. Queen Daenerys's dragons were the last known. But if there is a living dragon bonded to a Stark, might that change the balance of power across the realm? Arya heard the underlying question, would the North use the dragon as a weapon against other kingdoms or to assert itself more strongly? She set her jaw. I have no interest in conquest, she said. I only want a safe home for it and for me. If the realm views it as a threat, we risk being attacked first. But if we keep it secret forever, eventually rumors will surface anyway. Better to reveal it carefully to shape how the North perceives it. A long silence followed. Then Ser Edric spoke up in a firm voice, I fought in the wars. I saw men and women do unspeakable things for power. A dragon is power. If you say you mean no harm, Lady Arya, I believe you. But will outsiders believe the same? Will those who covet such a creature attempt to steal it or kill it? Arya stared at the table's worn surface. That's what keeps me awake at night. Sansa rose, smoothing her gown. For now, I propose we gather a small group like this one to see the dragon in person. We'll do so discreetly outside the castle walls. Once these witnesses confirm it exists and that Arya has some measure of control, we can think about how to proceed with the rest of our people. We must be united in our approach. One by one, they nodded, some more reluctantly than others. Sansa dismissed them with strict instructions to remain silent. As they filed out, she caught Arya's eye with a reassuring nod. We'll handle it, she mouthed quietly. Arya felt a swell of gratitude for her sister's composure. That evening, a cold breeze swept through Winterfell's courtyard as a small retinue assembled at the postern gate. Lord Glover wore a thick cloak lined with fur, his expression a careful mask. Maester Gorman carried a lantern, clearly wary but equally intrigued by the prospect of seeing a dragon with his own eyes. Ser Edric looked tense, hand on his sword hilt. 2 guards trailed behind them, along with a single steward tasked with carrying a heavy hamper of fresh meat. Sansa and Arya led them across the moonlit fields, retracing Arya's path. The air smelled of winter's approach, crisp and metallic. Overhead, stars gleamed and the pale shape of the moon lit their way. No one spoke much, as though words might summon disaster. At last, they reached the copse of trees where the dragon stirred at the sound of their approach. It rose, its silhouette a ripple of dark scales, wings partially unfurling. A low growl emanated from its throat. Lord Glover made a strangled sound. Maester Gorman hissed in awe, lifting the lantern for a better look. Arya stepped forward, speaking her soft words of reassurance. The dragon relaxed slightly, though its gaze swept over the newcomers with wary interest. It sniffed the air, detecting the tang of fresh meat. Arya beckoned the steward forward. He was a skinny lad, shaking so hard that the lantern light danced across the trees. Set it there, she whispered, pointing to a flat patch of ground. The boy dumped the hamper's contents, a pile of butchered goat and venison, then backed away hastily. The dragon approached with curiosity, sniffed, then snapped up a chunk with sharp, powerful jaws. Ser Edric breathed out. 7 hells. It's real. He sounded half disbelieving, half terrified. Maester Gorman edged closer, adjusting his spectacles. Remarkable, he murmured, voice trembling with excitement. He studied the length of the dragon's neck, the shape of its horns, the patterns on its scales. Truly a living dragon. Younger than Queen Daenerys's beasts were at the height of their power, but oh, just imagine what it might become in time. Arya stroked the dragon's side, relieved to see it eating calmly. She looked at the gathering, reading the mix of fear and fascination on their faces. You see it now, she said quietly. This is what I brought home. Lord Glover swallowed hard, stepping around to get a better angle on the creature's wingspan. I never thought. My lady, do you intend to keep it here? Within sight of Winterfell. Arya's chest tightened. I have nowhere else to go, nor does it. If the realm is at peace, perhaps we can remain here without conflict, unless the North itself rejects us. Lord Glover frowned, his breath pluming in the cold air. I speak for many houses, Lady Arya, when I say we do not reject House Stark. But a dragon is another matter. He glanced at Sansa, then at the beast. Still, I'll not be the one to stir panic without cause. If this is truly under your control, I'll hold my tongue, for the sake of loyalty. But I beg you, keep it far from farmland or livestock. My people have endured too much. Arya inclined her head. I understand. I'll do my best. They remained a while longer, letting the dragon finish its meal. Maester Gorman knelt nearby, scribbling notes on a scrap of parchment by lanternlight, muttering about scale patterns and rumored Valyrian bloodlines. Sansa watched quietly, her arms folded, glancing now and again at Arya as if to say, Are you all right? Arya nodded faintly each time, grateful for the unspoken support. When the lantern oil burned low, they returned to the castle, hush gripping them anew. Lord Glover and Ser Edric parted ways with Sansa and Arya in the courtyard, each lost in his own tumultuous thoughts. Maester Gorman lingered a moment, adjusting the strap of his satchel. Fascinating, he said, voice quavering. I never dared dream I'd see such a creature in the flesh. If you'd allow it, Lady Arya, I'd like to observe it more closely someday. I believe we can learn much from it. Arya gave him a guarded look. In time, perhaps. Carefully. I won't have it treated like a specimen. Of course not, he agreed hastily. I only wish to study from a distance, and to assist you in caring for it. Dragons have special needs, from what the old texts say. She nodded, some of her wariness easing. I appreciate that. He departed, leaving Arya and Sansa alone beneath the torchlit walls. The great keep loomed overhead, the stones glimmering in the torchlight, each one steeped in ancient history. Arya exhaled, rubbing at her temple. That was harder than I expected. Sansa slipped an arm around her shoulders. You did well. They believe you and they'll keep quiet for now. We should talk about how to proceed, how to let more people know without causing alarm. Perhaps we'll start with the castle staff, then the lords. Slowly. Arya nodded wearily, leaning into Sansa's warmth for a moment. I just hope it's enough. In the days that followed, Winterfell bustled as always, but beneath the surface, a new tension simmered. Lord Glover and Ser Edric stayed true to their word, spreading no rumors, but people sensed a secret in the air. Servants whispered of Sansa's late-night departures, of a monstrous shape glimpsed in the sky at dusk. Yet no one had proof. Arya continued to come and go through the postern gate, leaving food for the dragon or simply lying by its side, letting it rest amid the pine needles. Maester Gorman visited once, bringing along a wooden box of ointments and bandages in case the dragon bore injuries. He noted a few old scars on its wing membranes, the lingering marks from Valyria. Arya allowed him to apply a salve while she kept the dragon calm with her presence and low-spoken words. The maester was gentle, full of wonder, and the dragon tolerated him with minimal growling. Arya felt a flicker of hope that her companion might acclimate to more people, given patience and care. One chilly morning, Arya sat on a fallen log outside the copse, hugging her cloak around her shoulders as the dragon sniffed about for game. Sansa arrived with a pale face, wearing a travel cloak. She seemed preoccupied, and Arya stood at once. "What is it?" Sansa pressed her lips together. Word came from the south. The king has sent a raven. Bran is traveling through the Riverlands to attend to some border dispute. He'll be in the north soon. He plans to visit Winterfell. Arya's heart lurched. Bran. She could still picture him as a boy, the quiet dreamer who woke to find himself broken, then soared through visions. Now he was king of the Six Kingdoms, an enigma who saw more than most could comprehend. She wondered what he already knew about the dragon. Perhaps he had glimpsed it in his strange, far-seeing way. She glanced at the creature, rummaging in the undergrowth. "How do you think he'll react?" Sansa exhaled. "Bran is calm in most everything, but he also sees angles we don't. He may have concerns about what this means for his reign, or the realm's stability." She paused, meeting Arya's gaze. "But he's our brother. He won't betray us." Arya's nerves still jangled. "When will he arrive?" "Maybe 2 weeks. He moves slowly with a royal escort. He'll send ravens again before crossing the neck." Arya nodded, trying to settle her pounding heart. She felt a confusing mix of anticipation and anxiety. She had not seen Bran since their victory over the Night King, since he was crowned by the lords of Westeros. Their family had scattered soon after. Jon to the Wall, Sansa to govern the north, Arya to roam beyond the horizon. Bran, enthroned in King's Landing, perhaps lost in his visions of the present and future. Would the boy she remembered even exist behind that unreadable gaze? For the next week, the atmosphere in Winterfell charged with tension. Preparations for the king's visit began, repairing walls, repainting sigils, laying in supplies for the royal entourage. Sansa managed everything with a calm efficiency that spoke of her experience, though in private she showed Arya her weariness. "It's never easy when the king visits," she said one night, massaging her temples. "Even if he's our brother, the formalities can't be ignored." Arya stood beside her by the hearth, arms folded. Bran never cared for formalities. Sansa's smile was wry. "He may not, but the lords and ladies trailing in his wake will, and we must be mindful of appearances. The North's independence is new. Some might question whether we should still owe fealty. Bran won't force it, but politics are complicated. Your dragon will be one more complication." Arya could only agree. She spent her days helping where she could, though she was no lady of the hall. She oversaw the storing of salted meats for the king's party or went out to hunt with a few rangers in order to replenish Winterfell's larders. She took comfort in small tasks, anything that kept her mind from spinning. Each day she visited the dragon, who had begun to roam more widely. It often took to the skies for short flights over the surrounding hills, returning at dusk to the copse or some rocky bluff. A few shepherds from distant fields reported glimpses of a winged shape. 1 or 2 found scorch marks on outcroppings where the dragon had tested its fire. Sansa and Arya did their best to keep these rumors contained, but they spread in whispers nonetheless. At last, the day came when a raven arrived announcing the king's arrival within 3 days' time. Another message followed the next morning, stating his party had crossed Mokalan. Preparations grew frantic. Sansa delegated tasks to stewards, reeves, huntsmen, stable masters. Banners were hung, torches placed along the walls. The snow that had begun to fall was swept clear from the main courtyard. Even the great hall was warmed day and night, fires blazing in every hearth. Finally, horns blared from the watchtowers. The gates swung open and the royal procession entered Winterfell's courtyard under a fine veil of snow. First came knights in polished armor bearing the king's sigil, a weirwood tree with ravens combined with the dire wolf of Stark. Next, a pair of standard-bearers, their cloaks snapping in the wind. Then Bran himself, astride a black horse led by 2 guards. He was robed in layered fabric of midnight blue and silver, his hair cropped short, his gaze distant yet piercing. He looked older than Arya remembered, paler, too, as if he spent most days indoors. Sansa stood on the steps to the great hall, flanked by Arya and the assembled lords of the north. The courtyard fell silent. Bran was helped off the horse, though he insisted on walking a few steps on his own before leaning heavily on a carved wooden cane. Arya stepped forward with Sansa, heart pounding as she beheld her brother again. She bowed her head in respect, though it felt strange to do so, for he was still Bran. But he was also the king. His strange, all-seeing eyes settled on her. For a moment neither spoke. Then Bran's lips curved in a faint smile. Arya? She swallowed. Bran. Her voice cracked with unexpected emotion. He turned to Sansa, embracing her carefully. Sansa closed her eyes, relief etched on her features. Welcome home, she murmured. Bran nodded once, then looked again to Arya. You've brought back a piece of legend, he said quietly, so only she and Sansa could hear. I've seen it in my dreams. Arya felt a chill. Of course he knew. She pressed her lips together. I was going to tell you. He only nodded, offering no condemnation, but the weight of the knowledge hung between them. Meanwhile, the courtyard broke into a subdued bustle as the royal guards and attendants unloaded luggage, stabled the horses, and found quarters for the knights. Bran was escorted inside, with Sansa guiding him to the solar to rest. Arya stayed back, letting the swirl of courtiers pass around her. She caught glimpses of finery, the murmurs of southern lords marveling at Winterfell's stoic grandeur. She wanted to follow Bran immediately to speak with him about the dragon. But she sensed it would come in time, and Sansa was best suited to greet the noble guests. Instead, Arya slipped away, finding a moment's solace in the courtyard's far corner. She rested a hand on Needle's hilt, eyes roaming across the crowd. The air was thick with the smell of horses, the sound of servants shouting directions. Snowflakes caught in her hair. She felt a surge of restlessness, that old wanderer's urge to flee the chaos. But she belonged here, she reminded herself. She had chosen to return. Late that evening, after the feast in Bran's honor, Arya managed to see him alone. He was in a small, comfortable chamber near the Great Hall, chosen so he wouldn't have to climb too many stairs. A fire glowed in the hearth and the chill seemed pushed back by thick curtains. He sat in a chair by the window, gazing into the darkness. She slipped inside, shutting the door gently. He turned his head. Arya, he said again with that same quiet inflection. It's good to see you. Truly. She took a seat across from him, noticing how his face had a haunted cast as if he peered beyond the physical world. You too, she managed. I heard about your time as king, how you rebuilt after the wars, negotiated treaties. She trailed off, unsure how to summarize a reign spanning years. He tilted his head. A necessary duty. I see the realm in ways few do, but I still rely on Council Tyrion, Dav. Many others. His gaze sharpened. You've been far away, traveling to places no one imagined. And you brought a dragon back to the north. She studied her hands. You saw that in a vision? Yes. Vague at first, but it became clear when you landed on these shores. A living dragon, black-scaled with red undertones, wounded wings. It made me wonder if the old magic of Valyria had stirred anew, or if something else guided you. He paused. You don't happen to want the Iron Throne, do you? She snorted softly, shaking her head. No, I have no desire to rule. I just want a place for me and the dragon to live without being hunted or used. Bran's gaze flickered. This could change the balance of power in Westeros. The lords might fear you, or they might try to claim the dragon for themselves. Even I as king must tread carefully. The realm is fragile. I remember the chaos Daenerys's dragons caused powerful symbols of liberation but also devastation. Arya's voice trembled with sincerity. I'm not Daenerys. I won't burn innocents. The dragon is mine, yes, but I won't unleash it on the realm. I only ask for space. Bran nodded. I know. Still, we must handle this with caution. He drummed his fingers on the arm of the chair. You trust Sansa. I do as well. With her help, we can keep the lords from panicking. He paused. May I see it? A tiny smile tugged at Arya's lips. Yes. Whenever you wish. He rose carefully, leaning on his cane. Arya stepped forward to offer support, but he waved her off with a slight motion. I manage, he said, not unkindly. Together, they left the chamber, gliding through quiet corridors lit by sputtering torches. Most of the guests were asleep or deep in their cups. Outside, the snow had thickened, dusting the courtyard in white. Two of Bran's personal guards saw them and stepped forward, but he dismissed them. I want privacy, he said. Stay here. They exited through the postern gate, the same route Arya had taken so many times. The snow crunched underfoot in the fields. The moon was hidden behind clouds and an eerie hush blanketed the land. Bran moved slowly, each step deliberate, but his pace was steady enough. Arya guided him along a gentle slope, heart pounding at the thought of her two worlds colliding, her mysterious, far-seeing brother and the legendary beast she had rescued. At last, they reached the copse. Arya peered into the dark, searching for the telltale glow of the dragon's eyes. She found it curled near a boulder, thin wisps of steam rising from its nostrils in the cold air. The dragon sensed her presence and shifted, lifting its head. Then it caught sight of Bran. Instantly it tensed, the ridges on its neck flaring. Arya moved forward, murmuring reassurance. She laid a hand on its flank, feeling the taut coil of its muscles. Bran stopped a few steps away, leaning heavily on his cane. His eyes took on that distant quality Arya had seen before, as if he were looking through the dragon, or beyond it. She recalled how he once warged into ravens, how he touched the minds of beasts. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if he could do the same with a dragon. That possibility frightened her. But the moment passed, and Bran only let out a soft exhalation. "It's magnificent," he said, voice full of quiet awe. "A child of Valyria living here in the north." The dragon rumbled, a low note that made the nearby trees rustle with displaced air. Arya continued, stroking its flank. "We've learned to trust each other. I hope we can extend that trust to you." Bran took another careful step forward, close enough that the dragon could have lashed out if it wished. Arya's muscles coiled, ready to intervene. But Bran merely lifted a hand in greeting, as if acknowledging another living being rather than a monster. The dragon snorted, a plume of heated breath wafting around them. Then it relaxed again, curling its tail against the ground. Arya released a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. They stayed there for a time, neither speaking much. Bran studied the dragon's form, the texture of its scales, the intelligence in its eyes. Arya watched him in turn, seeing how his posture stiffened now and then, as if reacting to some unseen perception. At last, he turned to her, expression unreadable. "We must be honest with our people," he said softly. "Let them see that you and the dragon mean no harm. If we hide it for too long, the rumors will become fear, and fear will become violence." Arya swallowed. "I know. Sansa and I have been discussing how to reveal it. We plan to gather the lords, the soldiers, so they can witness how I command it, how it listens to me." Bran nodded. "I'll stand by you. That will help quell some nerves." He lifted his gaze to the star-flecked sky. "When I became the three-eyed raven, I saw visions of dragons over Westeros, but they were half-formed, intangible. I thought that part of history was finished. Perhaps it's not." Arya felt a pang in her chest. "Do you think it's a sign of something greater?" He closed his eyes briefly, then shook his head. "I can't see all ends. Only possibilities. But we have a chance to do better than the last time dragons roamed the skies. If we approach this with wisdom, it need not end in fire and blood." When they returned to Winterfell, the first hints of dawn lightened the horizon. Bran headed to his chambers, his guards bristling with questions about why the king had walked outside in the freezing cold. Arya brushed off the concerned stares of the castle servants and headed to the great hall, where she found Sansa awaiting them, slumped in a chair by the dying embers of a hearth. She sprang to her feet at the sight of Arya. "Well?" she asked, eyes searching Arya's face. Arya exhaled, closing the door behind her. "Bran's seen it now. He wants to support us, but he agrees we can't keep it hidden much longer." Sansa rubbed her arms, warding off the dawn chill that seeped through the stones. "Then that's settled. We'll invite the northern lords to witness a demonstration once the king consents. Best to do it sooner rather than later, before rumor turns into panic." Arya nodded, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "We'll have to do it carefully. I'll instruct the dragon not to breathe fire unless threatened. I don't want anyone to think it's a show of force." Sansa's lips curved wryly. "Just the presence of a dragon is a show of force. But we'll manage." She paused, her voice dropping to a gentler tone. "I'm proud of you, you know? This choice you've made, it's not easy. But you're doing it because it's right for you and the dragon." Arya's throat tightened. She glanced away, unaccustomed to such open praise from her sister. "I hope I'm doing the right thing," she whispered. Sansa reached out, squeezing Arya's hand. "You are a Stark. You follow your instincts. And we're with you." A week later, after much debate and planning, the day arrived for the official reveal. The northern lords gathered in a wide clearing just beyond Winterfell's walls. It was an expanse of flat ground used for mustering troops, ringed by wooden barricades and watched by archers posted on the outer ramparts, though Arya had insisted that the archers keep their arrows unnocked to avoid provoking the dragon. A cold wind swept across the plain, stirring cloaks and banners. Snow drifted lazily from a sullen sky. Sansa and Bran stood together on a raised wooden platform, joined by a cluster of key lords, Glover, Serwyn, Manderly, and a handful of others who had come for the king's visit. Maester Gorman stood at the side, his hands folded in anticipation. Rows of soldiers formed a perimeter, each man and woman eyeing the horizon. The tension was palpable, broken only by the occasional whinny of a horse or cough of a guard. Arya had promised to bring the dragon at midday. So as the sun reached its apex, though hidden by clouds, the watchers saw a dark shape gliding over the tree line. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd, followed by an intake of breath when the shape grew larger, wings extended, a living shadow against the gray sky. It circled once, then descended with a rush of wind, landing in the clearing, scattering snow in all directions. Gasps, shouts, and curses erupted among the onlookers. Some clutched at weapons. Horses bucked, panicking at the beast's roar. The dragon flared its wings, exhaling a plume of steam into the frigid air. Then Arya dismounted from its back. She had never been entirely comfortable in a saddle, but with the dragon she made do with a makeshift harness to keep her seat. She slid down, boots crunching on the snowy ground. The dragon let out a low hiss, scanning the crowd with molten eyes. Arya stood tall, drawing a deep breath. She felt a tremor in her limbs, but her voice rang clear across the field. "I am Arya Stark of Winterfell. This dragon is my companion. We mean no harm to the north." Tension crackled like lightning. Some lords looked ready to bolt. Others stared in mute fascination. The soldiers held their ranks, though Arya saw the fear in their eyes. Slowly, she turned, resting a palm on the dragon's flank. The beast remained still, though its tail twitched, and occasional wisps of smoke curled from its nostrils. Arya murmured words of comfort under her breath, half in the common tongue, half in high Valyrian. Bran motioned for silence. His voice, quiet yet commanding, carried across the yard. "You see here a living dragon, brought by my sister Arya Stark. She has formed a bond with it, and I stand here to show the crown's acceptance of this extraordinary event." A wave of astonishment rippled through the crowd. Some lords looked at each other in confusion, while others bowed their heads to Bran, acknowledging his authority. A few men muttered darkly. Arya's heart hammered, but she kept her face calm. She reached into a leather satchel slung across her body, drew out a chunk of raw meat, and held it up. The dragon sniffed, then snapped it from her hand in a single gulp. She patted its scales. She glanced at Sansa, who gave a subtle nod of encouragement. Taking a breath, Arya turned back to the crowd. "I know your fears. Dragons have brought both wonder and destruction to Westeros in the past. I've seen what this creature can do. I've also seen its loyalty, its capacity to protect. I ask you not to provoke it, not to see it as a tool or a threat, but as part of our north, my family." Murmurs spread again, uncertain. Then Lord Manderly, a large man with a booming voice, spoke up. "Lady Arya, if I may, suppose another kingdom hears of this dragon and demands you bring it to heel for their wars or their ambition. The north is free, but is the realm truly at peace?" Arya squared her shoulders. "No one outside the north has claim on us, and I won't fight anyone's war. If King Bran commands me to serve the realm's defense, that is between me and my brother. But I will not be subjugated to another lord's will." Bran leaned on his cane, face impassive. "House Stark stands united on this matter. The crown will not demand the dragon's service, nor will the lords of the north. It is Lady Arya's companion, not a living siege engine." Ser Edric, who stood behind Lord Glover, ventured forward. "Some might question whether it's safe to keep the dragon near farmland. Our small folk." Sansa's voice rose, measured yet resonant. "Arrangements have been made. The dragon can hunt in the wild areas north of here, beyond the farms. Should any livestock be taken by mistake, House Stark will compensate the farmers. We will not allow chaos to reign." The crowd muttered. Arya saw doubt lingering in many expressions, but she also saw a spark of awe in some. A glimmer of excitement at the prospect of a dragon allied with the north. The beast shifted restlessly, sensing so many eyes upon it. Arya stroked its neck ridges. The hush deepened, broken only by the swirling wind and the soft hiss of snow underfoot. Then something unexpected happened. A young boy, no older than 10 or 11, slipped through the barricade. Perhaps he was a page or the son of a minor household retainer. He stared at the dragon with wide eyes. Shouts rang out from the nearest guard, telling him to step back, but the boy kept moving forward, seemingly transfixed. Arya's pulse spiked. She tensed, ready to intercept the dragon if it grew agitated. But the creature merely angled its head, watching the boy approach. The boy stopped a few paces away, trembling with a mix of fear and wonder. Arya gently positioned herself between him and the dragon's head. She knelt to his level. "It's all right," she said, her tone soft. "It won't harm you if you don't frighten it." The boy's eyes darted from Arya to the dragon's massive jaws. Is it real? A real dragon? Arya smiled. Yes. What's your name? He swallowed. Mathis, he whispered. She nodded, beckoning him closer. Slowly, he extended a shaking hand. Arya guided it to the dragon's flank. The scales were warm, steaming faintly in the cold air. The dragon let out a low rumble but did not recoil. A hush fell over the gathering. Arya could almost feel the hearts of the onlookers pounding in unison. Mathis gave a little gasp. It's soft, sort of, he murmured, though the scales were in fact quite hard. But to a young boy's wonder, everything felt miraculous. Arya patted the dragon's side again, then coaxed Mathis back. A guard hurried over, ushering the boy away with scolding tones. Yet Arya saw how that simple moment had changed something in the crowd. A wave of cautious awe replaced some of the raw terror. If a child could touch the creature without being turned to ash, perhaps it was not the demon they feared. Bran took advantage of the moment, raising his voice. You have seen it with your own eyes. Let it be known that this dragon stands under the protection of House Stark. It will not menace the north so long as it is not provoked. Anyone who dares attack it or seeks to seize it will answer to me and to Lady Sansa. That final statement, delivered with quiet authority, seemed to settle the matter. Lords exchanged glances, some bowing their heads. Soldiers relaxed, though a few kept their hands on their hilts. Arya let out a pent-up breath, stepping toward the platform where Bran and Sansa stood. She felt the dragon shifting behind her, adjusting its weight in the snow. Sansa's eyes shone with relief. She murmured to Arya, "It went better than I expected." Arya grimaced faintly. "For now. We'll see what rumors fly once the southern lords hear of it." Bran leaned close, speaking just loud enough for them to hear over the rustle of the crowd. "I will remain in Winterfell for a while longer to solidify this understanding. Then, if needed, we can craft official missives to the rest of the realm. We won't hide it, but we won't flaunt it either." Arya nodded. "I appreciate that. Thank you." He squeezed her shoulder briefly, a rare show of affection. Then he addressed the onlookers, dismissing them in a measured way, urging them to return to their duties, to keep calm, to trust in House Stark. One by one, they filtered out. The soldiers broke rank, leading horses away. The lords conferred among themselves, faces drawn in quiet conversation. A swirl of conflicting emotions lingered in the air, fascination, unease, a hint of pride that such a wonder had come to the north. At last, the clearing lay mostly empty, save for a few guards posted at a respectful distance and the occasional retainer. Arya turned, looking at the dragon. It flicked its tail, leaving a groove in the snow, then huffed out a cloud of smoke. She brushed her hand along its side. The beast angled its head toward her, eyes half-lidded. She felt Sansa's presence behind her. "You did it," Sansa said quietly. "I think they accept the both of you." Arya let a faint smile cross her lips. "I hope so." She had spent so much of her life surviving moment to moment, never quite sure where she belonged. Now she stood in the cold heart of her ancestral home, with a dragon at her side, forging a path forward that no one could have predicted. She gazed at the rising walls of Winterfell, the snow swirling like white ash in the wind. Memories pressed in, the courtyard where she once dueled Brienne, the crypts where she grieved lost family, the battlements where she gazed upon the endless north. It was all part of her, yet she felt renewed, changed. The next days were a blur of cautious acceptance and small adjustments. The dragon wandered the fields outside the walls, scorching deer for its meals, occasionally roosting on rocky outcrops that overlooked the castle. Shepherds kept their flocks well away, though House Stark compensated any who lost livestock due to chance encounters. Word spread across the north, and travelers began arriving to see this miracle for themselves, though Sansa and Bran kept a tight rein on such visits to avoid a circus-like atmosphere. Maester Gorman made a habit of quietly recording observations, noting the dragon's growth, its diet, its signs of intelligence. Sometimes Arya would catch him watching the beast with an almost childlike wonder, scribbling furiously in his journal. Ser Edric and the guards, for their part, stayed on guard but slowly eased their hostility. Now and then a curious soldier might venture close, only to jump back at the slightest growl. Arya divided her time between the dragon's domain outside the castle and her family inside it. She shared evening meals with Bran and Sansa, swapping stories of her travels, though she kept certain details. Her faceless men training, her darkest deeds, tucked away. They discussed the realm's future, the possibility of forging alliances with other kingdoms under the unspoken understanding that a dragon now safeguarded the north. Bran emphasized caution, while Sansa saw opportunity to negotiate from a position of strength if any southern lord dared test their independence. Though tensions arose, Some lesser lords feared the dragon might signal a renewed push for power by House Stark. Those concerns faded when it became clear that no armies marched and no demands were made. Life in Winterfell settled into a new normal, with a winged guardian perched on the horizon at dawn or dusk, a faint silhouette that cast a mixture of awe and humility over those who witnessed it. One late afternoon, when the snow glowed pale under a golden sun, Arya ventured into the godswood alone. The ancient weirwood tree stood at the heart of that sacred space, its face carved in timeless sorrow. She knelt by the small pool, the dragon absent, off hunting somewhere in the hills. A hush enveloped the clearing. She heard only the soft trickle of water and the sigh of branches in the wind. For a long time, she knelt in silence, remembering her father's presence in this very spot, the way he prayed to the old gods. She thought of her mother, her brothers, the swirling tide of fate that had carried them all so far from the innocence of childhood. The swirling face of the weirwood seemed to watch her, eyes red and knowing. She spoke softly, letting the words drift into the calm air. "I've come home, Father. I've brought something I can't explain. It's changed me. I hope you'd understand." She looked up at the carved features in the bark. No answer came, of course, only the faint rustle of the tree. But she felt a gentle stirring, as if the old gods listened without judgment. Then she heard soft footsteps on the snow. She turned, half expecting Sansa or Bran. Instead, she saw Jon Snow. A sharp pang of disbelief struck her. Jon? But no, he was exiled to the Night's Watch beyond the wall. She blinked, and in that fleeting second, the figure vanished, as though it had never been. A trick of her mind, perhaps. Yet the wave of longing that rushed through her was real. She missed Jon, missed the bond they'd shared. She recalled the last time they met, how he had chosen exile for the sake of the realm's peace. She rose slowly, disturbed by the phantom vision. The old gods had always spoken in riddles. Perhaps it was just her memories playing tricks. She wrapped her cloak tighter, stepping away from the tree. As she turned, the hush broke, and she heard a low rumble overhead. A familiar shape passed across the canopy, the dragon, returning from its hunt. She glimpsed it through the branches, a dark silhouette against the bright sky. A sense of grounding flooded her. No matter what ghosts haunted her, she had a reason to stand firm. That evening, she joined Bran and Sansa in a small private chamber, where they took supper together, away from the formality of the great hall. They dined on roast venison, bread, and mulled wine, the candlelight casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. After the meal, a hush settled. Arya stared at the flames in the fireplace, recollecting the godswood's stillness. She felt restless, as if something tugged at her. Bran, ever perceptive, studied her. "What troubles you?" She glanced at Sansa, then back to him. "I saw something in the godswood. A memory of Jon or a vision, I'm not sure. It reminded me how fractured our family still is. He's beyond the wall, living out his sentence. We're here, grappling with the weight of a dragon. It just doesn't feel finished." Sansa's brows drew together. "I miss him too, but what can we do?" He agreed to that exile. It was part of the peace after Daenerys was. She trailed off, the memory painful. Arya looked at Bran with a searching expression. "Is he well?" Bran's eyes grew distant, as if focusing on something far away. Then he nodded slightly. "He lives. The free folk accepted him as one of their own. He wanders the forests, hunts with them, keeps the peace. Ghost is with him." Tightness eased in Arya's chest. "At least he's not alone." She sighed. "I just can't shake the feeling that we're not meant to be so scattered. Your king, Sansa's Lady of the North, Jon's beyond the wall, and I—" She hesitated. "I'm not sure what I am, besides a girl with a dragon." Sansa took her hand, squeezing gently. "You're a Stark, Arya. That's enough. You always have a place here. If you need purpose, we can find ways for you to serve the North, or help Bran with matters of the realm." Arya tried a smile, though uncertainty lingered. "Maybe. I can't see myself as a courtier or a lady. I'm more comfortable out there, patrolling, exploring." Maybe I could serve as a scout or an emissary. The north is vast. I could fly the dragon over the mountains, keep watch for any threats. Bran tilted his head. A winged guardian of the north. That might be your path. Ours is not a land of knights and chivalry. We rely on vigilance, on harsh truths. A dragon could watch the borders, deter invaders. Sansa looked thoughtful. That would reassure the lesser lords. They've worried about ironborn raids, rogue clans in the mountains, and remnants of lawlessness. If you soared overhead on that dragon, it would be a warning to all who might threaten us. A flicker of resolve sparked in Arya's chest. She thought of the child, Mathis, who had touched the dragon's side. She remembered the wonder in his eyes, and the sense of possibility it stirred in her. Maybe that was the role she and her companion could fulfill, protectors, watchers. Far better than letting the creature rust away in some stable, or be used as a blunt instrument of war. She nodded slowly. I like that idea. It means I wouldn't be locked in a castle. The dragon and I can roam as we please, but still serve the north. Bran and Sansa exchanged a glance. Both smiled. Then it's settled, Bran said quietly. Take your time, though. You'll need to train with the dragon, learn to fly greater distances safely, scout effectively. But yes, be our eyes and our fire on the horizon. They lingered by the fire, discussing details. The idea excited Arya in a way she hadn't felt since her earliest days of traveling. A sense of purpose, of forging her own path. She needed to hone the dragon's flight skills, ensure it wouldn't tire easily, and find safe roosting points across the north. She'd have to carry supplies for extended journeys, or arrange caches at friendly holdfasts. It would be a new chapter for both of them. As the days stretched into weeks, Arya began practicing. Early each morning, she rode the dragon into the skies above Winterfell, short flights at first, circling the castle or skimming the treetops. She wore thick leathers, a fur-lined cloak, and rigged a better harness to keep her seat. The wind whipped her hair. The world spread beneath her in breathtaking panorama. It reminded her of the first time she'd seen kings landing from the hills, or the first time she glimpsed Braavos' Titan. Yet now she was the one in the sky, part of the great tapestry. The people of Winterfell became accustomed to seeing her silhouette overhead, the dragon's roar echoing across the ramparts. Children stopped their play to watch in awe. Shepherds shielded their eyes, warily checking that the beast did not dive for their sheep. Arya took care to keep the dragon away from livestock, though sometimes curiosity led it astray. In such cases, she swiftly reined it in, scolding it with stern words and guiding it back to the wilderness. Occasionally, Bran and Sansa joined her on a low hill outside the walls, watching her practice. Bran would track her flight with an uncanny focus, as though perceiving more than just her physical motions. Sansa alternated between pride and apprehension, evidently relieved that Arya had found a calling but unable to fully quell her fear that something could go wrong. Reports came from outlying villages, rumors of a winged shadow passing overhead, though no harm followed. Some folks saw it as a sign the north was under strong protection, others muttered about old terrors reborn. But no one dared challenge it. House Stark's word was law in the north, and King Bran's presence reinforced that law with the authority of the crown. As the winter days pressed on, Arya undertook her first long-range flight. She prepared carefully, stowing dried meat, a waterskin, and bandages in saddlebags lashed to the dragon's flank. She consulted with Sansa about her route, deciding to head northwest toward Deepwood Motte, Lord Glover's seat, then curve south to Torrhen's Square before returning to Winterfell. The journey might take 3 or 4 days, depending on the weather. Bran and Sansa saw her off in the courtyard at dawn, along with a small cluster of guards. The dragon crouched, letting Arya climb into the harness. She checked the buckles, tested her footing in the stirrup-like loops. Sansa handed her a thick cloak lined with wolf fur, eyes filled with concern. Stay warm. The winds up there will be unforgiving. Arya nodded, smiling. You sound like Mother. The word slipped out before she realized it. Sansa blinked, tears threatening, then gave a shaky laugh. Bran stepped closer. Remember, be cautious. Don't push the dragon too hard. If a storm rises, find shelter. She pressed a hand to Bran's shoulder. I will. With that, she urged the dragon to launch skyward. It spread its wings and bounded into the air, lifting her above the towers of Winterfell. She felt an exhilarating rush as the ground fell away, the castle shrinking, the people below becoming tiny figures. The cold wind battered her face, but the dragon's body radiated heat. She leaned into its motions, recalling every lesson gleaned from their practice flights. With powerful strokes, it climbed higher, a dark shape against the pale morning sky. Far below, she glimpsed Sansa raising a hand to shield her eyes, Bran tilting his head to watch. The rooftops of Winterfell receded as the dragon angled northwest, heading across snow-dusted fields and patches of conifer forest. Arya steadied her breathing, guiding the dragon with subtle tugs on the harness and shifts of her weight. It responded, dipping its wings to follow her lead. In the distance, the mountains edged the horizon like jagged teeth. For hours, they flew over the wild expanse of the north, a land both stark and beautiful. Arya spotted frozen rivers winding through valleys, herds of elk moving in the distance, and once or twice she saw smoke rising from isolated cottages or holdfasts. The dragon rumbled now and again, an almost contented sound. She felt its heartbeat thrumming through her own body. They landed to rest near midday, choosing a sheltered clearing beside a rocky ledge. Arya fed the dragon some strips of dried meat, then let it range a bit in search of fresh prey. She crouched under a pine, sipping from her water skin, the cold biting her lungs. This was freedom in a sense she'd never experienced, even more so than her wandering days across the sea. She was a wolf in the sky, free to roam where she pleased, but with the knowledge that she had a home to return to. By evening, she reached Deepwood Motte. Lord Glover, informed by Raven, waited in the courtyard with a handful of nervous guards, all of whom blanched at the sight of the descending dragon. Arya landed outside the gates to avoid trampling anyone. Glover's face was set in a grim line, but he forced a courteous bow. "Lady Arya, that's a dramatic arrival." She swung down from the harness, patting the dragon's flank. "I'm on a circuit to ensure the north remains safe. I'd like to stable the dragon outside the walls, if there's room. I'll need a place to sleep for the night." His gaze flickered to the beast's serrated teeth, then back to her. "We have a clearing near the outer palisade. My men will bring food if needed." She nodded. "Thank you." He ushered her inside, and she spent the evening in his hall, enduring cautious courtesy. She answered his questions about the dragon, explaining her new role as a watcher of the north. He nodded along, though Arya sensed he was still uneasy. Yet he offered her a guest chamber, and she was grateful for a roof and a warm bed. The following morning, she departed early, leaving Glover's men wide-eyed as the dragon beat its wings and soared into the sky once more. She traveled southward over forests and hills, glimpsing the sea to the west, its dark waters churning under a slate-colored sky. Occasionally, she let the dragon descend so it could hunt game in the wilderness. She felt a primal thrill each time it dove, snatched a deer or boar, and unleashed a burst of flame to finish it off. The beast was a predator at heart, but it hunted for sustenance, not wanton destruction. That was enough for Arya. At Torrens Square, House Tallheart's seat, she had a similar reception, a mixture of dread and awe. The local lord was absent, so she met with the castellan, who seemed relieved when she promised not to remain long. She left a token of House Stark as proof of her goodwill, then continued eastward, charting a wide arc that would eventually bring her back to Winterfell. After a few nights camping under the open sky, a sensation she found oddly nostalgic, she spied the familiar shape of Winterfell's towers. Snow flurries whipped around her as the dragon descended, landing once more in the courtyard. Guards and stable hands scattered, cursing at the sudden gust. Sansa emerged from the keep, a hood pulled over her braided hair. Arya dismounted, stamping her feet against the cold. Sansa approached, face lit with relief. "You're back safely. Any trouble?" Arya shook her head. "All quiet, though the lords still eye the dragon like it might devour them at any moment." She ran a hand along the dragon's neck, feeling its breath puff in frosty clouds. "It was a good trip. We'll do more, maybe go farther next time." Sansa smiled. "I'm glad. Now come inside, warm yourself." They ascended the steps to the great hall, where a blazing fire roared in the central hearth. Servants offered mulled wine, which Arya accepted gratefully. As she sipped, she noticed Sansa was eyeing her with a strangely hesitant look. "What is it?" Arya asked. Sansa's mouth tightened. "A raven arrived from King's Landing. Queen Daenerys's former advisor, Tyrion Lannister, passed away." Arya felt a jolt, recalling the clever, half-mocking man who had once traveled across the north, who had been a key figure in so many events. "I'm sorry to hear it," she said, meaning it. "He did much to guide Bran's rule, didn't he?" Sansa nodded. "Yes, he served Bran loyally. With him gone, the politics in King's Landing might shift. Bran still has Davos and others, but Tyrion was unique." She hesitated. "There's more. They mention that rumors reached King's Landing about a dragon in the north, though no one there seems to believe it yet. The Raven warns us that if the rumors persist, lords might press Bran for answers." Arya sighed heavily, setting her cup aside. "We knew this day would come. Let them question him. Bran will handle it." But Sansa's expression remained troubled. "You know the Game of Thrones. There may be those who want to exploit the rumor. They might rally forces to come see, or to challenge us, or to demand the dragon's presence in the capital." Arya's jaw clenched. "If they try to force us, they'll fail. The North is free." Sansa touched Arya's arm. "I'm on your side always, but we need to be ready. If you see an army marching up the King's Road, or ships appearing at White Harbor, we can't be caught unprepared." Arya forced herself to nod. She understood all too well that the presence of a dragon could ignite a powder keg of ambition and fear. Even though she had no intention of leaving the North or waging war, others might not believe her. "I'll continue my patrols," she said, voice low. "Any sign of a large force, I'll spot it from the air." In the days that followed, she did just that, flying the dragon along the main roads, scanning the terrain, occasionally venturing further south to the edges of the neck. She saw no sign of a southern host, only the usual trickle of travelers and traders braving the cold. Word of her flight spread, and more small folk came to accept that the North had a dragon rider in its midst. Some even viewed it as a point of pride. Then one morning, while finishing a routine patrol, Arya spotted a column of riders near the edge of a dense pine forest, well south of Winterfell. Through the dragon's keen eyes and her vantage in the sky, she made out unfamiliar banners. A surge of alarm gripped her. She urged the dragon lower, skirting the treetops to get a closer look. The men wore no obvious sigils of great houses, but they were armed and numerous, perhaps 200 or more. They marched north seemingly with purpose. Arya circled, heart pounding. 200 men was not an overwhelming force against Winterfell's walls, but it was no simple party of travelers. They moved in disciplined formation. She wondered if they were sellswords or mercenaries. The dragon growled softly, sensing her tension. Aware that she might be spotted, Arya guided it back upward, returning swiftly to Winterfell to report. She found Sansa in the Great Hall, conferring with Lord Glover about some routine matter. Arya interrupted, breathless from her flight. "There's a group of armed riders coming from the south," she said. "A couple hundred, maybe more. No clear sigils. They're moving in formation." Sansa went pale. "Are you sure?" Arya nodded. "I saw them with my own eyes." Lord Glover set his jaw. "It could be bandits, but that's a lot of them. Or perhaps a minor lord testing the North's defenses." Sansa frowned, tapping her fingers on the edge of the table. "Gather the guards, alert the watchtowers. I'll have ravens sent to the surrounding holds. We'll greet them with caution." Arya narrowed her eyes. "I can fly out again and watch their approach. If they try anything, the dragon will make them think twice." Sansa nodded. "Do it, but don't let them lure you into a trap. I'll prepare a reception at the gates. If they wish to speak, we'll hear them. If they come with ill intent, we'll be ready." Thus began a tense day of waiting. Arya took to the skies, trailing the column from a distance. She observed them making camp at twilight, still without raising any recognizable sigil. The men lit fires and posted sentries. She flew back to Winterfell under the veil of night, reporting to Sansa and Bran that they showed no sign of turning away. By dawn, the travelers broke camp and continued forward. In the late morning, the riders emerged onto the open plain before Winterfell. By then, the castle's gates were closed, archers manned the walls, and a line of Stark soldiers waited behind wooden barriers. Arya circled overhead, the dragon's presence a dark shape against the pale sky, a silent warning. Below, the riders slowed, halting just out of arrow range. Their leader, a tall figure in dark leathers, raised an empty hand in a gesture of parley. From her vantage, Arya saw Sansa and a small retinue ride out to meet them at midpoint, no doubt with guards hidden in flanking positions. She wanted to be at Sansa's side, but they agreed it might be more intimidating for Arya to remain in the sky. She circled lower, letting the dragon's roar echo across the field. She saw the riders' horses shy, some men gripping their swords in alarm. Sansa reined in her mount a short distance away from the leader. Her voice carried in the cold air. "Who comes unannounced to Winterfell bearing arms?" The leader lowered his hood, revealing a middle-aged man with graying hair and keen blue eyes. Arya did not recognize him. "My name is Harwood Slater," he called back. "We come from the Vale." A murmur rippled through Sansa's retinue. The Vale of Arryn was long allied with the north but also close to King's Landing. Sansa's voice stayed firm. "You bear no sigil. Why come in secret with an armed company?" Slater spread his hands. "We are an expedition seeking passage to the far north. We heard rumors of a dragon in these parts, commanded by a Stark. We wish to see it, perhaps enlist its help." A hush. Arya felt her pulse quicken. So they were fortune seekers, or adventurers, or mercenaries. She could guess what kind of help they might want. Perhaps the chance to use the dragon for their own ends. From the height of the dragon's back, she snarled softly under her breath. She guided the creature into a slow glide, letting it pass overhead with a thunderous flap of wings, a show of dominance. Men below cried out, huddling closer. Sansa did not flinch. "The dragon is not for hire. And you travel with a large force. That troubles us. If you seek peaceful trade, you'd come with fewer swords." Slater hesitated. "We took precautions in the unsettled lands between the Vale and the north. But I assure you, we've come in peace. We've heard stories of undead in the far north beyond the wall. Strange sightings. We want the dragon's protection for an expedition. There are treasures rumored in ancient ruins, artifacts. We'd pay handsomely for your assistance." Sansa's face hardened. "You risk war by crossing the north with an army unannounced." Slater forced a smile. "An army? My lady, we're but a modest expedition. 200 men is hardly an army. Please consider our proposal. We'll pay the north. The Vale's region is aware, but we kept a low profile to avoid rumor. We didn't mean to alarm you." Arya circled again, feeling the dragon's impatience ripple through her. She wanted to swoop down to warn these men away. But she held back, trusting Sansa's judgment. Sansa's voice turned cold. "I'll hear your proposal in my hall. But if you step out of line, or if you intend any harm, my sister and her dragon will ensure you regret it." Slater's gaze flicked upward, where Arya hovered. He nodded slowly. "Understood. We submit to your terms." And so, under heavy guard, the strangers from the Vale were escorted inside Winterfell. Their horses were stabled under watchful eyes, and only Slater and a few unarmed men were allowed into the great hall for a formal audience. Arya landed outside the walls, then joined Sansa within, stepping into the hall just as Slater began his formal bow. The man's eyes flicked to her, then to the sword at her side. A faint nervous swallow betrayed him. Bran sat at the high seat with Sansa at his right, a subtle testament to the unusual arrangement that the King of the Six Kingdoms was also a Stark in his own home. Arya took up a position to one side, arms folded, aware that her presence, her rumored bond with the dragon, lent extra weight to every word. Slater cleared his throat. "We apologize for our abrupt arrival. The roads are perilous. We've lost men to bandits and wild beasts. I didn't intend disrespect, but time is pressing. We heard rumors of old powers stirring beyond the wall, strange lights in the night, travelers claiming to see shapes in the snow. We want to explore to see if there's truth to these tales. Artifacts, valuables, knowledge. We hoped that a dragon could give us safe passage." Arya's gut twisted. She recalled the nightmares of the White Walkers, the long night, and how it ended. The idea that something might stir again beyond the wall was terrifying. But perhaps this was just profiteering rumor. She spoke up, her voice carrying across the hall. "The far north is dangerous in winter, with or without undead. You think a dragon will guard your treasure hunt? You risk lives for greed. Slater bowed respectfully in her direction. Milady, we seek knowledge as well as profit. The libraries in the Vale speak of hidden ruins once occupied by the first men. If there is any chance of discovering lost lore of runes or forging techniques, imagine the benefit to the realm. Bran studied him with an unreadable gaze. We know the old powers beyond the wall. I do not sense any new threat. The Night King was destroyed. Slater pressed on. Be that as it may, these tales persist. With the dragon's protection, we could travel more safely, return with artifacts or information that could benefit the North and the Vale alike. Sansa's lips thinned. And how do you propose to pay for such an undertaking? Slater brightened, pulling out a folded parchment. We've acquired backing from certain lords in the Vale, gold, supplies, all guaranteed. We'd share half of any discoveries with Winterfell, of course. Arya exchanged looks with Sansa and Bran. She read Sansa's expression, deep skepticism. Bran, meanwhile, had that distant look again, as though sifting through possibilities. Finally he spoke. I sense you believe your own words, Slater. But you must realize how the North perceives a band of armed men crossing our borders, seeking to hire our dragon. This arrangement cannot proceed unless Lady Arya agrees. The dragon is hers alone. All eyes turned to Arya. She felt a swirl of conflicting emotions, distrust of these strangers, curiosity about what truly lay beyond the wall, and the undeniable lure of exploration. She had always yearned for discovery, after all. Yet was she willing to risk the dragon's safety on some uncertain expedition? Why come now, she asked Slater. Why not petition King Bran or Lady Sansa first? Slater hesitated. We tried to keep it secret to avoid competition. If word spread that the Vale was mounting a treasure hunt beyond the wall, we'd have every cell's word in the realm chasing the same rumor. Arya paced slowly before the dais, her footsteps echoing on the stone floor. You want me to be your shield so you can loot whatever you find. If there are wildlings beyond the wall, if there are ancient curses, you think a dragon will keep you safe. She paused, meeting his gaze. I swore to protect the North, not to enrich a band of opportunists. He inclined his head. We ask only for permission and aid offered in return for a share of spoils. Not all of us are opportunists, my lady. Some seek to push the boundaries of knowledge. Silence stretched. Sansa frowned, glancing at Bran, who remained impassive. Eventually she spoke. You're asking a great deal, Slater, for little guarantee. Your men are camped outside our walls, expecting to rely on our hospitality. We can't let you roam the North freely, not without oversight. Slater spread his hands. We'll accept any conditions. We'll go unarmed if you demand it. But we would at least like the chance to prove ourselves. Arya sighed inwardly. She didn't trust them, but a small part of her felt the tug of curiosity. Could there be something stirring beyond the wall? She recalled the swirling snows and the White Walker's silent horror. She also recalled that Jon was up there somewhere. If these men intended to journey into that realm, perhaps she could glean news of him or even see him. The thought fluttered in her chest. But it was dangerous to hope. She turned to Sansa, then to Bran, seeking their counsel with a look. Bran answered in his measured tone, we cannot commit the resources of the North to every rumor. But if Arya wishes to investigate, we won't stop her. She is a Stark of Winterfell with the freedom to choose her own path. Sansa spoke next, voice gentler. Sister, it's your choice. If you do want to see what's happening beyond the wall, at least you'll be there with the dragon for protection. But are these men worth trusting? Arya's mind whirled. The open sky called to her, the wide unknown. Beyond the wall, she might find closure with Jon, or reassurance that no new threat stirred. And part of her yearned to test the dragon's capabilities in the harsh far north. She exhaled. I need to think on it. For now, your men can camp near Winterfell under guard. We'll supply you with basic provisions at a cost. No one roams beyond the gates without permission. She fixed Slater with a hard stare. If I decide to go, I lead. You follow my orders or you return home. Slater bowed, relief evident in his posture. Agreed, Lady Arya. Thank you. She nodded curtly. We'll speak again. Sansa gestured to the guards, who escorted Slater and his companions out of the hall. Once they were gone, she turned to Arya. Be careful. These men may be after more than knowledge. Arya let out a weary breath. I know. But if they're telling the truth, if something stirs beyond the wall, I'd rather learn of it myself than wait for chaos to come knocking. Bran studied her with that penetrating gaze. If you do go, do not go alone. At least take a few loyal northern rangers. The dragon is mighty, but you'll need eyes and ears on the ground. Arya nodded, tension throbbing behind her eyes. I will. Let me decide. Over the next few days, Slater's men camped under strict watch outside Winterfell, bundled in their tents against the northern cold. Arya made discreet inquiries about their backgrounds, gleaning that many were former sellswords. Some had once served lesser lords in the Vale, and a few were scholars or scribes seeking knowledge of the first men. No clear pattern emerged except that Slater paid them well. At night, Arya often lay awake in her chambers, recalling fragments of her childhood, the savage wars, her travels across the sea, and the uneasy peace of the present. She also thought of Jon. If she flew north of the wall, might she find him? She remembered the vow he had made, the uncertain future he faced. She couldn't deny a deep yearning to see him again, to let him know she was alive, that she had forged her own destiny. Eventually, she made her decision. One afternoon, she summoned Slater and told him she would guide his expedition beyond the wall, on her terms. House Stark Rangers would accompany them. All men would swear oaths to follow her orders. Any attempt at betrayal or pillaging would be met with immediate expulsion or worse. Slater agreed, brimming with enthusiasm. Sansa and Bran supported her choice, albeit with visible concern. Sansa insisted on selecting the rangers who would go, picking men loyal to Winterfell. Bran offered no direct warning, only telling Arya that he sensed no immediate doom beyond the wall, but that the path was never truly safe. Arya embraced her siblings before departing, promising to send ravens if possible, or to return swiftly if anything went wrong. A week later, a small caravan departed Winterfell, forging north along the King's Road, heading toward the Gift and Castle Black. The people of Winterfell watched with anxious curiosity as the dragon soared overhead, shadowing the travelers below. Slater and his men marched in disciplined formation, packs laden with supplies, while the Stark Rangers, led by a grizzled man named Gowron, kept a close eye on them. Arya alternated between riding on horseback and taking to the skies with the dragon, ensuring no ambushes or hidden dangers lurked. The air grew colder by the day. Snowdrifts piled along the roadside. Abandoned farmsteads dotted the landscape, remnants of the hardship the North had endured. Eventually, they crossed the invisible boundary into the new Gift, the stretch of land once given to the Night's Watch. Arya's memories returned in force, traveling this road as a girl, passing through these lands in the aftermath of war. Now she came with a dragon and an uncertain mission. They reached the wall's vicinity where the ruined castles of the Night's Watch rose in stark silhouette against the icy sky. Castle Black stood in partial use, though the Watch's numbers were small. More wildlings than black-cloaked brothers roamed the areas beyond, or so rumor said. Arya felt a pang of familiarity at the sight of the old fortress. Here, Jon had once served, guarding the realm against the dead. So much had changed since then. The garrison at Castle Black, a mere handful of men, gaped openly at the dragon's arrival. Their acting commander, a weary older ranger named Meryn, welcomed Arya politely but eyed Slater's band with suspicion. They had no means to stop so many armed men, let alone a dragon. Arya explained her plan, to move beyond the wall, investigate possible disturbances, and return with news. Commander Meryn nodded slowly, seemingly relieved that the travelers didn't plan on staying. That evening, Arya stood atop what remained of the wall, no longer the sheer ice monolith of old, but still an imposing barrier. A chunk had collapsed during the wars, and years of mild neglect made it less formidable. The wind howled, and she pulled her cloak tight, gazing north. Endless white expanses stretched away into mystery. She thought of Jon's face, the look in his eyes when he rode away with the free folk. She wondered if she might find him now, or if he had vanished deeper into that icy wilderness. The next morning, Slater's expedition crossed through a repaired gate, venturing into the true north. Arya flew overhead with the dragon, scouting the route ahead. The landscape was a study in harsh contrasts, rolling snowfields, jagged ice-crusted rocks, and stands of wind-whipped evergreens. Little sign of human habitation appeared, save for the occasional remains of a campfire or a scattering of footprints that could have been made by wildlings. Days passed. The cold bit harder with each step north. Slater's men grumbled, but he urged them on, promising they were close to where rumors placed the strange sightings. Arya ranged far ahead, scanning for any sign of trouble. She saw only the endless wilderness, broken by hills and frozen streams. It seemed lifeless except for a few hardy animals that scurried away at the dragon's approach. On the 5th day, they camped in a hollow sheltered by stunted pines. A swirling snowstorm pinned them down, forcing the dragon to curl up at the edge of the encampment, shielding itself with its wings. Arya huddled in a tent with the Stark Rangers, listening to the wind lash the canvas. Slater and his men pitched their tents nearby, though they no longer seemed so confident. The supply caches were running thin, and no sign of treasure or artifacts had emerged. Arya felt the beginnings of resentment stirring among the company. That night, she dreamed of the House of Black and White, of silent corridors and face-swapping illusions. She dreamed of Valyria's ashen ruins, of the dragon wounded and alone. Then the dream shifted to Jon, standing in a snowy clearing, beckoning her forward. She tried to speak, but her voice stuck in her throat. She heard a wolf's howl echoing in the distance and woke with a start. The storm relented by midday, leaving the world cloaked in fresh snow. The expedition resumed its trek. Arya flew ahead to scout, half hoping to see a sign of Jon's presence, maybe a wildling camp, a direwolf's tracks. Instead, she caught sight of something else, a faint glow in the distance, shimmering at the edge of a frozen lake. A swirl of uneasy excitement gripped her. She guided the dragon lower. The glow was subtle, like dancing northern lights, but contained in a single area. She circled overhead, trying to discern its source. When she landed to investigate, the dragon hissed, stamping in the snow. Arya advanced cautiously on foot, noticing that the swirling lights emanated from a rough, circular arrangement of stones, a ring perhaps constructed by the children of the forest eons ago. The air there crackled with a faint static charge. She felt her hair prickle on the back of her neck. Something old lingered here, something that might be magical in nature. Slater and his men soon arrived, breath steaming. They stared at the glowing sight with mingled wonder and apprehension. Slater's eyes shone greedily. "This must be it," he murmured. "A place of the first men. Perhaps the children's magic is still present." Arya frowned, circling the stones. She saw no immediate threat, but the atmosphere felt off. A slight hum vibrated beneath her feet, as though the earth held a spark of power. One of Slater's scribes stepped forward, rummaging for quills and parchment, muttering about runes or writing. The men spread out, checking the perimeter. The dragon hung back, tail lashing, clearly ill at ease. A sudden gust of wind whipped across the lake, sending snow swirling. Arya narrowed her eyes. The wind carried a strange sound, like distant whispers. She turned to Slater, about to suggest caution, when a shout rang out from one of his men. "Tracks!" She followed the call to the edge of the circular stones, where faint footprints trailed away into the snow. They were human-sized, though partially filled by fresh flakes. The shape was odd, as though the feet were bare. A chill crawled up Arya's spine. She exchanged a glance with the Stark Rangers, who likewise looked uneasy. Slater, oblivious to the tension, beamed. "Proof there are people here, maybe wildlings or something else. We might ask them about this site." Arya murmured, "Or maybe we should leave it be." But Slater was already forging ahead, following the tracks. His men jostled after him, swords ready. Arya bit back a curse. She signaled Gowron, the ranger captain, to keep the group tight and watchful. The last thing she wanted was to stumble into some unknown danger. The footprints led away from the stones, across a shallow drift, then vanished near a stand of twisted pines. Arya felt the hairs on her neck rise. The dragon let out a low growl, wings shifting. She pressed a reassuring hand against its flank, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. The wind howled. Suddenly, one of Slater's men cried out, stumbling backward. A figure emerged from behind a pine, a gaunt, white-faced shape with pale blue eyes. Arya's blood turned to ice. A white? Or something akin to it. She recalled the White Walker's armies, the endless ranks of undead. But the long night was over. The Night King was destroyed. This should not be possible. The figure advanced on the terrified man, limbs stiff, mouth opening in a silent snarl. Before Arya could move, Slater lunged, driving his sword into its chest. The creature staggered, but did not fall. It seized Slater with corpse-pale fingers, knocking him to the ground. Chaos erupted. The other men rushed in, swords flashing. The Stark Rangers cursed, forming a defensive line. Arya dashed forward, yanking Needle free, her heart hammering. As she closed in, the white turned its icy glare on her, hissing. She remembered the training that Dragoglass or Valyrian steel could kill the undead. Needle was castle-forged steel, not Valyrian. She had no dragonglass blade. But she had something else, the dragon. She shouted a sharp command, stepping aside. The beast bounded forward, letting loose a plume of flame that engulfed the white in an inferno of heat. The creature shrieked, thrashing wildly. In moments, the fire consumed it, leaving only smoldering ash. Panting, Arya whirled around, searching the trees. More shapes emerged, 4, 5, maybe 6. Pale, tattered remnants of what might have been wildlings or lost travelers now reanimated with that same terrible stillness. Slater's men screamed, hacking at them with steel that only slowed them down. A few fell, but not for long. The Stark Rangers closed ranks, fear etched on their faces. Arya wasted no time. She urged the dragon to sweep fire across the clearing. Flame roared, turning snow to steam, incinerating the whites. They flailed and burned, leaving blackened patches in the drifts. Then, just as quickly, they were gone, the reek of charred flesh fouling the air. The wind howled again, as if in lament. For a few heartbeats no one moved. Arya's breath rasped in her chest. She looked at Slater, who lay sprawled in the snow, eyes wide with shock, his hair singed by the dragonfire. One of his men helped him up. Burned corpses littered the clearing. She counted at least a dozen, including some that had been revealed only by the fire. They must have been buried in the snow, waiting. Galrin wiped sweat from his brow, half frozen in the cold. Gods help us. The dead? They still walk. Arya's mind reeled. The White Walkers and their whites were supposed to have perished with the Night King. Had some fragments remained, hidden in these remote lands? The thought sent a chill deeper than the winter wind. She stepped forward, scanning the destroyed corpses. They did not bear the same swirling markings or runic gear the White Walkers used. These looked more like frozen husks, animated by some lesser magic. Nonetheless, they were undead. A faint shimmer lingered on the air. She recalled the glowing circle of stones, the hum of ancient power. Could that place have reawakened them somehow? Slater gripped her arm, eyes wild. You see? This is why we needed the dragon. The rumors were true. He coughed, a harsh sound. Think of the possibilities. There might be more sights like this. Arya shook him off, disgust roiling in her stomach. The possibilities? These whites nearly killed you. What if there's a whole nest of them? He flushed, trembling. We'll be more careful. With your dragon. She cut him off. You're mad if you want to keep going. We've seen enough. The North must be warned that pockets of undead remain. We have to cleanse them, ensure they don't spread. Galrin nodded vigorously. We should return, gather more forces, maybe send ravens to Winterfell and Castle Black. We can't risk a horde of essay things. Slater looked torn between fear and greed. But the sight, there could be knowledge. Arya's patience snapped. Knowledge won't matter if we're all corpses. She gestured at the circle of stones behind them which still glimmered faintly in the distance. That place might be tied to the children's magic. It's not for you to plunder. Tension crackled in the air. Some of Slater's men, emboldened by surviving the attack, muttered that they could continue. Others looked terrified and wanted to turn back. Slater glanced at the bodies, then at the swirling snow and seemed to deflate. Very well, he said at last, voice trembling. We'll pull back. Arya turned to the Stark Rangers. We burn the corpses thoroughly, then retreat. I'll take to the skies again, ensure no more are lurking nearby. She set her jaw. This changes everything. The dead are still out here. Even if the White Walkers are gone, some remnant remains. They carried out the grim task of burning the bodies, scattering the ashes in the snow. Slater's men moved with terrified haste, eager to leave the cursed clearing. Arya mounted the dragon and ascended, scanning the horizon for any further shapes. She saw none. Only the stark emptiness of the far north. But emptiness could hide many secrets. They set a hard pace heading south. No one complained about the forced marches. Fear spurred them. The cold nights were filled with uneasy watch, men jumping at every noise. Arya used the dragon's presence to keep them safe, landing near camp each evening, flames at the ready. But no further undead appeared, whether that was a blessing or simply a lull, she couldn't say. At Castle Black, Commander Meryn paled when he heard the news. He agreed to dispatch ravens to every holdfast in the north, warning them that whites had been encountered. He had no men to spare for a campaign, so Arya decided to return to Winterfell that they might gather forces if needed. Slater's expedition parted ways, battered and humbled. They vanished down the King's Road, uncertain whether they still wanted to find artifacts after that near-death encounter. Arya soared back to Winterfell, her mind heavy with the realization that the undead threat had not fully vanished. The Night King was gone, but the north was vast and old magics lingered in hidden places. She and the dragon touched down in the courtyard at dusk, surprising the guards who scrambled to make way. Sansa and Bran hurried out to meet her. She dismounted stiffly, breath steaming. "There are whites beyond the wall," she said, voice grim. "Not an army, but enough. They nearly killed Slater's men." Sansa went pale. Bran's eyes flickered with deep worry. "I suspected fragments might remain, but they must not be allowed to grow." Arya felt the dragon's breath against her shoulder, an infernal heat in the cold air. She realized with certainty that her duties as a watcher, as a guardian of the North, had only begun. She had not come home simply to rest. The realm still harbored shadows, old nightmares that refused to die quietly. But she would not falter. She had a dragon by her side, a bond forged in Valyrian ruins, and a fierce heart that had endured every trial. Standing in the courtyard's fading light, flanked by Sansa and Bran, the dragon coiling behind her, Arya sensed a new chapter unfolding. She remembered the child she'd once been, headstrong, sword in hand, longing for adventure. She had found more than adventure. She had found purpose, and a power that could protect those she loved, if used wisely. The North would need that protection as it always had, and she, Arya Stark, would not turn away from the fight. Snow drifted silently from the sky, kissing the stones of Winterfell, dusting the dragon's scales. In that hush, she met her sibling's eyes. Sansa's expression held both fear and faith in her. Bran's held a measured acceptance of destiny. Arya set her jaw. The old gods watched from the heart tree in the godswood. The memories of her ancestors whispered through these walls, and beyond the horizon, ghosts of the past still lurked. She placed a hand on the dragon's flank, letting its warmth steady her. "We'll face what comes," she said softly. "Whatever is left of that darkness, we'll burn it away." In that moment, she felt the old spirit of the North rise within her, fierce and unyielding. She was Arya Stark, a wolf of Winterfell, and the dragon beside her was not a herald of doom but a promise that the North would stand strong against any threat, even the specters of the dead. She lifted her gaze to the snow-filled sky, heart resolute. Home at last, with her destiny still unfolding, and a dragon's roar echoing across the land like a vow.